Hey, good morning, everybody. If you can hear me, would you let me know in the chat box, please? Awesome. Looks like we're good to go. Hey, all right. So some people have already started. Thank you. But if you've been on a webinar with me before, I love to know. You already know that I love to know where in the world you are, what grade you teach or are going to be teaching. So go ahead and drop that in the chat box and we will get going pretty shortly here. Hey, Tanya in Ontario, Lauren in Texas, Melissa in Wisconsin, awesome. Molly in Arizona, welcome. Terry, Lisa in Madison, Illinois, Catherine, welcome. Kristen, Allison with two L's, welcome. Katie in New Hampshire, welcome. Katie, Teresa in Georgia. Hey, Regina, it's going fast. I know I'm missing people, sorry. Diane, welcome. Adria, welcome. Kathy, Heather, Dot, Diana. Looks like we've got some US teachers, Canadian teachers. Don't know if we have any other countries yet that I've seen. Hey, Miriam, Betty, Becky, hey there. Megan, Annie, sweating in South Carolina today. Yeah, it's been hot here too in Nashville. Tanya, welcome. Maria, another Canadian teacher. Awesome. Megan, welcome. All right. So many teachers here. Awesome. Hey, Anton, am I saying your name right? Here from the nation's capital. Welcome. Lori, welcome. Marina in Brazil. All right. Got another country. Welcome. Okay. Well, I'm so excited you all are here. I do want to go ahead and get going because it is that time and we have a lot to share today. So in a minute, I'll explain why today's a little bit different than other webinars I've done, but I want to welcome you. I want to say thanks for coming to spend 2 hours with me. Usually my webinars are only 1 hour long, but this is an extra special thing that I'm doing just for today before our summer kind of wraps up here. But thanks for coming to hang out. I hope that this will be helpful to you. A couple of things I want to mention. With so many people in the room right now, we're up to like 700. Sometimes people will get locked out of chat. And if that happens to you, I truly apologize. Unfortunately, there's nothing that I can do on my end. I do get a list of who attends though. So if you're here and you're not able to chat and you're worried about not being entered into the giveaway at the end, which I'll tell you more about in a second, you don't need to worry. I do get that list of everybody who's here. So if you can't chat, I apologize. You can always try like going in a different browser like Google Chrome or coming back in from those reminder emails. But I do have a list of everybody who's here. So if you can't chat, I truly apologize. Hopefully, other than that, it will be smooth sailing tech-wise. I will give some tech tips in a minute here, though. Alrighty. So many awesome teachers from all over. Wonderful. Oh, Sharon was having chat issues before. Yeah, you're not doing anything wrong if it happens. I've been talking to the software company and it's just a thing. I keep bugging them, but yeah, I do hate that when that happens because I like to be able to hear from all of you. All right, so we are here for the workshop classroom, how to implement reading and writing workshop in K2. Couple of housekeeping items. Google Chrome is what they recommend for the browser to use. If you have any issues or we get cut off for whatever reason, there should be a reconnect button and you can always go back to those emails and try to reconnect that way. So if something's not working, if a mobile device isn't working, see if you have a laptop you can use. Just if something goes wrong, try something else. I always have a backup plan on my end here, but hopefully, fingers crossed, it'll be smooth sailing. Let's see, any other, the one other thing I wanted to mention is that there's a 20-second gap in between what I'm saying and when you're hearing me say it. So that can get tricky with the chat box. Just something to be aware of. Another tricky thing with the chat box is it scrolls so quickly, as you're probably seeing already. So excited to have so many wonderful teachers here, but I do miss things, unfortunately, in the chat just because there's so much going on. But I want to encourage you to use it, ask questions, answer each other's questions. We have a wealth of knowledge here in this room with all of you and all your experience and learning. So feel free to take advantage of that chat box. I will periodically go back and answer questions, but I do apologize if I missed your question, and just know that it's not intentional at all. So I think that's all I wanted to mention for housekeeping. And if you've been on a webinar with me before, which I know many of you have, welcome back. I am excited that you're back for more and also back for this special webinar event that I'm doing today. So if you don't know me, welcome for the first time. My name is Allison and I'm a reading specialist for K2 is what I mostly focus on, but I do work with students up through 5th grade now. My classroom experience was in pre-K, kindergarten for several years, and 1st and 2nd. So primary is where I feel most at home, and that's what all my webinars and everything focus on. I live with my husband, Jonathan, in the Nashville suburbs. We have 2 little fur babies, Max and Lindsay, and I love being outdoors whenever I can be, kayaking, hiking, all that good stuff. And I work part-time in my reading specialist job, and I devote the rest of my time to these webinars and my blog, learningattheprimarypond.com. I have a TBT store, also Learning at the Primary Pond. I also have a kindergarten literacy club now, which will be actually reopening next month for new members. So I love being able to work with kids at my school, work with students, but also be able to serve all of you because teaching has never been something that's easy for me. And if I can make your life easier, your teaching better by sharing what I've learned, if I can help you like skip over some of the stumbling blocks that have really tripped me up, then I am happy to do that. So I love both sides of what I do. And I'm excited you're here for today's workshop. All right, so if you followed me for a little while, then you know that I do these webinars like this one on different literacy topics. Typically they're an hour long, and today's webinar is actually 2 hours. We are covering in this workshop both reading and writing workshop. And I also know that some of you may have seen one of my workshops that are either like how to implement reading workshop or how to implement writing workshop, or both. And so if you have seen like one or both of them, I want to let you know that today is going to be like some review, but I would still encourage you to approach today by asking yourself, like, what can I learn from this time around? Because like for me, I find that when I listen to something again, new things pop out. Or something else to ask yourself is, how can I refine what I'm already doing? Because you may be already doing a lot of this, and that's great. But when I listen to a presentation, even if I know some of the information already, I find that just the act of listening and making me think, it tends to spark like new ideas and thoughts for how I can apply it to my own students. So if you have been on like one or both of these individual webinars that I've put together today, I hope that today is still helpful for you. And do know at the end, we're going to be talking about how reading and writing workshop can kind of go together. Now, if you're in another camp entirely and you haven't seen either of these, reading and writing workshops individually, then just know that today is a lot of information. But at the end of the presentation, I'm going to share with you how you can kind of get some support in implementing all of this, because I do know that it's a lot, but I have other ways that I can support you going forward after our 2 hours today. Thank you so much to everybody who's helping troubleshoot. I hate when people have issues. Video is unavailable and restricted. Maybe if somebody could just type to make sure if they're on a school computer, sometimes it blocks this for whatever reason, and try to rejoin and try to use Google Chrome if it's not working. So thanks to everybody who is helping troubleshoot. I hate tech issues. All right, so here's what's on our agenda. It is long. We're going to start by talking about like what is the workshop approach in general, like big picture, like not just reading workshop, not just writing workshop, like what is this and why would we teach like this? Then we're going to go into some more in-depth information on reading workshop as well as writing workshop. And then at the end here, make sure that I know it's a long day today, but make sure that you can stick around to the end, because at the end is where we're really going to talk about like how do these 2 parts work in tandem? How can we build like a workshop classroom? How can our kids benefit from that? And then at the end too, I'm going to share some information with you about this reading and writing workshop combined bundle that I now have available. And that's actually the giveaway prize. So as long as you're able to stay live till the end, you'll be automatically entered into the giveaway. Again, if you can't chat for whatever reason, like I know that's frustrating and I apologize, but not to worry, because I do still get a list of everybody who is here live. So I will have that list for the giveaway. And then at the end, I will answer many more questions because, as I said, unfortunately, I do miss things. The chat just scrolls. But at the end, I'll answer as many questions as I've missed. So that is our big plan for today. All right, so let's look at the workshop approach as a whole. Like, what does it mean to have a workshop classroom, to implement workshop in our classrooms? All right, so the workshop approach is basically just, and actually, you know what? I said a structure for teaching reading and or writing, but really it could even be like math. To me, workshop is all about teaching something or modeling something and then having students practice with real tasks, like real reading tasks, real writing tasks, even math. Like, we're not talking about math today, but it could even be math tasks, and then some kind of wrap up. So usually a workshop like model consists of a mini lesson, independent student work time, and then some kind of sharing time or wrap up. And something important about workshop is that it provides many opportunities for student choice and ownership. So them taking ownership of their own learning. We're not always telling them exactly what to do, exactly what skills to practice. Of course, we give guidance, lots of guidance, but there is like a lot of student choice and ownership in the workshop model. And the workshop model promotes social interaction around texts as well. So the kids are not just reading or writing by themselves, they're also interacting with their peers in some kind of way. And again, I appreciate everybody who's troubleshooting. I apologize if you're having issues. All right, so let's also talk about why the workshop approach is effective. Like, why would we bother with this to begin with, right? So the workshop approach involves kids actually applying strategies to authentic reading and writing tasks. So this is different from, for example, like, let's say we are teaching a comprehension skill, like making predictions or whatever. Instead of just giving kids like a prediction making worksheet, we're actually having kids make predictions with the books that they are reading. So that's an example of applying strategies in an authentic way. The workshop model provides time for independent practice because the more kids read and write, the stronger readers and writers they become. The workshop model also creates motivation. I mentioned student choice was big and social interactions around text. You know, it's fun for kids to get to choose what they're reading about to some degree. You know, I always provide guided choice. It's fun for kids to get to choose, again, to some degree, what they're writing about. And then with social interactions, like I've shared this before, but I'm in a book club with some of my friends, not education related, just for fun. And it is so much fun to get to talk about what I'm reading with them once a month. And it also motivates me to actually finish the book because, like, next Saturday we have book club, like, I got to finish this book. So that's one of the reasons why workshop is so helpful, is because it really motivates kids to be readers and writers. The workshop model is also convenient in that it gives us an opportunity to meet with students in small groups and or one-on-one while other students are working. So all the kids are working independently, which enables us to differentiate both small groups, one-on-one, and that's important for literacy instruction or any kind of instruction as well. Okay, so that was kind of like workshop as a whole. Now we're going to dig much deeper on reading workshop for our next part. Okay, so reading workshop generally consists of these things, and reading workshop looks a little bit different depending on, you know, who's teaching it, what your school requirements are, but generally speaking, reading workshop involves a daily whole group mini lesson to teach different aspects of the reading process. So like a reading strategy. This mini lesson gives kids access to teacher thinking about the text, because we're actually telling them like, oh, as a reader, like, I'm thinking this, or I'm wondering this. Reading workshop also gives students time for kids to read mostly self-selected books and opportunities for kids to discuss texts, as I mentioned, and that might be through partner reading. Maybe you do book clubs. Maybe you have sharing time, which I really recommend. And reading workshop also provides time for the teacher, for us, to check in with kids and provide instruction individually and or in small groups. So again, reading workshop can really look different from classroom to classroom. And the way I run my workshop, it might not be the exact same way as like the teacher next door runs hers, and that's totally fine. But I'm just going to share with you what I do and see if you can adapt it to your own situation. This has worked with me, I will say, for kinder, first, and second grade. When I first started implementing reading workshop, it was in kindergarten. So kindergarten teachers, this is applicable for you, and we'll talk more about what your workshop would look like in a little bit here, but this does work for K2. I've seen it work in my own classroom. So the whole block here, I usually allow 20 to 35 minutes. If you have more time, like sure, go for it. But I find that, that myself and most of us are strapped for time nowadays. And so we start with the whole group mini lesson, which is typically like 5 to 10 minutes. I would say 10 minutes is usually what it is for me. 5 minutes would be more like kindergarten at the beginning of the year, depending on what you're doing. And then there's this independent reading time. And that often I only have 10 minutes for, and that's fine. If you have like 20 minutes and you're teaching second grade or more, like go for it for sure. You can just do independent reading in there. You could also make time for partner reading. And then you're conferring with kids one-on-one, or you are pulling small groups, or both, depending on what your literacy block looks like as a whole. And then I love to have sharing time at the end. Sometimes I feel like, okay, like I'm behind schedule, I need to rush on to the next thing, but we'll talk more about sharing time in a bit. I just feel like it's so motivating and so powerful for the kids in terms of, I don't know, getting them focused during independent reading time and like reading for purpose because they're going to share with a friend. So the amount of time that you spend on these components in the workshop altogether will really depend on the grade level you teach and the time in the school year. A lot of us are getting ready to start our years soon. And so you're not going to start right out of the gate with like a 35-minute reading workshop block. In kindergarten, typically at the beginning of the year, I really just do like a 5 to 10 minute mini lesson, and I have like 5 minutes or less to read. Sometimes I add on partner reading, and that grows to 10 minutes. And same kind of goes with the beginning of first grade. Even with second grade, we start out small with just like 5 minutes of independent reading time at first, and then we work from there. And so this, this higher end of the scale here, this might be like what you're at toward the middle of the year or the end of the year, but it's not necessarily where you're going to be right out of the gate. So I think the main takeaway here is that if you feel like, oh my gosh, my schedule is so packed and I'm having, so much trouble getting in reading workshop, just to know that like you can do reading workshop in 20 minutes. It doesn't have to be this big thing. You're maybe having literacy centers at a different time, and kids are practicing reading skills in other ways throughout your literacy block and throughout your whole day. So if you have 20 minutes, like you can still do reading workshop in this amount of time, and you will still see the benefits because it's this dedicated time for kids to read independently. Plus, of course, the dedicated time for you to teach a reading strategy. All right, so a couple of other notes about how I structure my workshop. During the independent work time, the kids are all reading. So I mentioned a second ago that we do have centers or other independent activities at a different point of the day that might be a little bit noisier, but when I do reading workshop, I like to have my kids all reading at once, even if it's for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And I prefer having a dedicated time for reading, for just reading, and not like word work and all these other things that are also important, but we do it at a different time, because it creates that calm, quiet atmosphere. And then I have some dedicated time to do conferences. So I like conferences or conferring one-on-one with students. I also like small groups. But what I find is that if I leave a block for myself and I'm like, okay, I got to fit in guided reading and conferences, I just end up doing guided reading or small groups. But if I set aside this reading workshop time where all the kids are reading, we're all focused on that, then even if it's just like 2 conferences a day, I have a little more time to focus just to working with kids one-on-one, and that helps me. And other teachers do it differently. Maybe they have like a larger block of independent work time, and kids are also doing word work, writing, and other things as well as reading. And if that's you and that's what works for you, awesome. This is just kind of how I prefer to do things because I like that calm, quiet atmosphere that everybody reading creates. Again, even if it's only for 5 minutes. So what is reading workshop not? Reading workshop does not exclude non-readers or pre-readers from participating. You can teach, especially for my kindergarten teachers, beginning first grade teachers, you can teach pre-readers to tell themselves a story by looking at the pictures. You can have them pretend read a familiar story that you've already read to the whole class. Or maybe you have song lyrics or poems that you've been doing during shared reading. Those kids that can't read yet, they can pretend read those. And even though they're not technically reading yet, by teaching them the reading workshop routine, you are building kids' interest in books and texts, and you're also building their attention spans. So yes, even in kindergarten, I start building the reading workshop routine from the start of the school year. I don't wait till my kids can read because there's so many other good like literacy activities that they can be doing and building their own ability to work independently. Reading workshop does also not mean that we can't meet with small groups. Some people think of reading workshop as being like, oh, well, I'm only conferring one-on-one with kids. That's not true. Like if you want to meet with a small group, meet with a small group, or you can do it at a different time of day. It's really up to you. And reading workshop does also not mean that we can't use centers or a daily 5 sort of approach. So with centers, like I said, I'll have like a short reading workshop block as long as I have time, and then a separate time for centers. And so reading workshop is just about reading, just about one-on-one conferring. And then centers is like longer. It's when I pull guided reading and the kids are doing all sorts of activities. Now, if you want to use a daily 5 approach, you can still have, if you don't know what daily 5 is, don't worry about it. But if you do know what it is and you want to use this, you can still have your rotations and everything, but I would do a mini lesson that's focused on a reading strategy, and then maybe have everybody reading at the same time. And then maybe your next rotation, it's a different mini lesson and the kids can work on all sorts of different activities. But I do find that it's really nice to have that focused time where everybody is reading. Okay, so now let's talk about the mini lesson, which is the time during reading workshop when you teach the entire class a reading strategy or a pre-reading strategy, depending on what level your kids are at. And sometimes it'll be a new strategy, but often you'll be reviewing a strategy or building on something that you taught before. There's a ton of different great ways to structure or organize your mini lesson. And what I'm going to show you is one format. This is the format that I typically use. And I also made up a little acronym to help you remember the different components. So the acronym that I came up with is COMIC. The word COMIC doesn't mean anything. It just happened to work with all the words. But COMIC stands for connection, objective, modeling, interactive practice, and charge. And so now we're going to go over what each one of those things means. All right, so the connection is the first part of the mini lesson. It's very brief and it's all about setting the stage. So you just quickly remind students what you've all been working on so that they can see how the strategy that you're about to teach fits into the bigger picture. So you might make a connection to the genre you're working on. Hey, we've been reading a lot of nonfiction books, so now we're gonna, learn a new nonfiction strategy. Or maybe there's a strategy that you've been working on. Yesterday we were working on determining main idea. So today we're going to continue with that. Or this is kind of like the strategy thing, the previous lesson. Yesterday we were reading this book. Today we're going to continue reading and focus on this. So just kind of getting kids to see like, this is not some random lesson. This fits into the bigger picture of what, slide hasn't changed. Thank you guys for letting me know. This happened a couple of weeks ago. So what are we on? Still on all about mini lessons. Thank you. Okay. I am so sorry. I'm going to unshare and then I will reshare. Okay, so tell me, can you now see the COMIC acronym? Is it up there now? Yes. Okay, super. Okay, just tell me if it's not changing again. Maybe I'll just tell you verbally when it's supposed to change. I hate that this is happening. I hope that it stops doing this. It was driving me crazy. I think this happened in June. Anyway, this was the COMIC structure that I was trying to tell you about. It just helps you remember the different parts of the mini lesson that I teach: connection, objective, modeling, interactive practice, and charge. I'm changing the slide. Tell me if it did not change. We talked about connection, like making connection to whatever you're working on in the unit or the previous day, or just trying to get the kids to see that it's not an isolated lesson, that this has to do with other things that you've been working on. And when I do make the connection, I might start by saying, we've been practicing, or we've been working on this, or we've been learning about that. And sometimes I try to make things a little more exciting, like get them hooked in the lesson in an interesting way. But this connection part, this first part of the mini lesson, it's really just one simple sentence. It doesn't have to be a whole long explanation. It's just, hey, we've been practicing this. And so then I lead into my objective. I changed the slide again. So this next portion of the mini lesson is also very brief, and I just tell my students exactly what I want them to learn. So for example, today I'm going to show you how I reread part of a text when I don't understand what the author is saying. So this helps focus their attention during the mini lesson, and it keeps things really clear. And I also think it's important to tell students why what I'm going to teach is important or why it matters to them. So if we're thinking about that example of rereading when you don't understand, I would say something like, the whole point of reading is to understand what the author's saying, right? So this reading strategy can help you better understand the text if you get confused. Changing the slide again. Hopefully you see modeling in a couple of seconds here. Okay, so we've made a connection to like the whole unit or what we've been working on. We've told our kids the objective, and next we're going to model. So this is usually the longest part of the mini lesson, and I'm showing kids exactly how to use the strategy in actual text. So I try to model the strategy a couple of times if at all possible. And the modeling portion of the mini lesson can take different forms. So maybe you grab a text that you've already read with students and you model how to use the strategy with like part of the text. Or maybe you're starting a new text and you're reading it to or with the students. Or maybe you're continuing to read a text that you already started. So lots of different options, but you want to work with part of a real text. And unless you've got something like a text that's really short, like a poem or something, you likely won't read all the way through the text, and that is totally okay because it allows you to spend more time on the mini lesson focus. So if you've ever had the experience, I used to try to get through like an entire read aloud book and then work on a strategy. And at least with like Kinder First, maybe even Second, they just kind of lose focus because you've tried to read this whole book, which is like 10 minutes long, and then maybe you're working on a strategy for another 10 minutes, and that can be a long time. So that's why I really prefer to work with just like part of text rather than the whole text. But however you do it, I do believe it's important for students to be able to put their eyes on the text so that they can see exactly what you're talking about. You can use a big book if you teach Kinder or First. You can also use a text on chart paper or put something up on the interactive whiteboard. You can put a regular size book and stick it under a document camera. If you don't have a document camera, there are also iPad apps that you can use or that you can download to use your iPad as a document camera. So lots of options. You don't need a copy of the text for every single child. I just want all my students to be able to look at it so that I can point things out in the text, words, things in the pictures, just so that we're all focused on that one thing. So as far as an example goes for the modeling part, and I will go over an example of like a whole lesson altogether shortly here, but if we're thinking back to that example of reread a confusing part strategy that I was mentioning a minute ago, I might pull out a new nonfiction text or one that we started reading the day before but we didn't finish and start reading it to my kids or with them if they're able to read along. And then after I read a page or two, I might stop and say, I really don't understand what the author is saying here. So if we're doing like a coral reef book, I know he's talking about the coral reef and the animals, but I'm really not sure what he's saying. So what can I do? I can read this page again to help myself figure it out. And then you would actually go through the process of rereading, and then you would think aloud, okay, so now I see that the author is saying that the coral reef is a type of animal or living thing, and that other animals also need the coral reef to survive. Rereading that page helped me understand it better, and now we can keep reading. So that was just like a little think aloud example of what you would say to your kids and what you'd be doing during the modeling portion. And then with that strategy, like with any other, I would probably read a few more pages and then model getting confused again and think aloud as I reread to figure it out. All right. After you've modeled, you'll want to give the kids a chance to try out the strategy with your support. And I would say about 75% of the time, I have my students practice the skill in that same text that I'm using for modeling. So I'll just turn to a new page and have them help me use the strategy again. So like I might say, I'm confused on this page. Like what can I do, boys and girls? And they would hopefully encourage me to reread the text to better understand. And the reason why I like to have this interactive practice or guided practice in the same book instead of like taking out a whole other book or doing a whole other activity is because it's just so quick. It's convenient. I only have like 10 minutes for my mini lesson. If I can model a strategy and then have them practice in that same book, it's just a time saver. I would say about 25% of the time though, I do maybe like 10 to 25%, I change things up and do something a little different. So like, for example, I might have had the kids bring their reading bags to the carpet because I like having them sit for the mini lesson. We're all looking at one thing, they're all together. I might have had them bring their reading bag, say, okay, when you come for the mini lesson, come bring your reading bag or your reading box. And then I might have them identify a place in their own book where they could apply the strategy, maybe working with a partner to do so. So that's one option. Again, I don't do that every single day. A lot of times the kids are just, helping me practice it in the text that we're already reading. But once in a while, I do try to get them to apply it to the books that they're reading in their bags right there. And it kind of depends on the strategy. Sometimes strategies lend themselves to that. Sometimes they don't. Another option that you can do is to give kids something specific to look for during independent reading time. Maybe they're doing it with a partner, or maybe you're coming around and helping them. Maybe they mark something with a sticky note or write on a sticky note to show where they used the strategy that you just taught and what they learned. So again, you have options there. Last but not least, we have the charge. And I call this the charge because you're charging students to try out the strategy that you just showed them. So during this part of the mini lesson, I will restate the teaching point. Today I showed you how to reread part of a text when you get confused about what the author is saying. And often I like to have the kids restate the teaching point themselves, especially if it's a strategy that we've worked on before. So if they've heard me say it before, it's nice to have them restate it to a partner, and then of course we'll review as a group. And then last, I encourage students to apply the strategy to their own reading. So going back to that example lesson I've been talking about, I might say, when you're reading, always ask yourself, do I get it? Do I understand what the author's talking about? And if you notice that you don't, just stop and reread the confusing part. That can help you get back on track. So I'm telling the kids how to apply it in their own reading lives. And then that's the end of the mini lesson. All right, so I'm going to answer questions in a second. I know I have missed some great questions and I apologize for that, but I do want to show you in a more connected way, what one mini lesson can look like, because we talked about each part and I gave some examples, but I think it might be helpful, especially if you haven't been on a reading workshop webinar with me before. I think it might be helpful to look at one whole mini lesson. So let us do that. This example that I'm going to do is a kindergarten example. It comes from my reading workshop units, which is part of the giveaway. This strategy is something I would not use at the beginning of kindergarten, probably middle or end of kindergarten. And this strategy also can be used with first and second graders. I don't teach this exact lesson with first and second graders, but the same strategy is something that I use with them. So I'm going to just go through the lesson. Obviously, it's not as real as if I really had students here. That would be ideal. But as I go, I will speak to you as if I'm teaching you the lesson and you're my students. But I'll also point out each part of the comic acronym here. And hopefully the example will be helpful to you, seeing, everything together. All right. So for my lesson, I have some word cards, and then I also have this book that we've been reading during this week or whatever. Okay. So I'm going to hold up this card. It says runs if my little video is super small on your screen. So I'm going to say, okay, kindergartners, today as we reread Pig and Pug, which they've been reading or we've already read before, we're going to look for words that have an S ending like this one. So right there, that was my connection, C, because I reminded them we've been reading Pig and Pug. We already read it, but I also actually stated the objective. So did you hear how quick that was? It was just, today as we reread Pig and Pug, we're going to look for words that have an S ending like this one. And that's basically what we're going to be doing today. So I combine the connection and objective into one short sentence. Then I would go on and I would say, sometimes these words can seem like they're a little tricky to read, but let me show you a trick. So then I would cover up the S. I would read the word run, and then I would add the S back on at the end. So I might say okay, I know that says run. So runs, that says runs. And then I would point out how the S actually makes the Z sound in that word, right? It's not runs, it's runs. So we would talk about that. And then I would say, if we cover up the ending with our finger, it can make it easier to read the whole word, right? Because we see the base word run, and then we add the S to make runs. So then I'd hold up a couple of other examples. I'd hold up look and say, okay, I'm going to cover up the S at the end. And then hopefully they would be able to read that. And then they would hopefully be able to get looks. And we do that with a couple of more examples. So plays and sits. And each time I would cover up the S ending with my hand. Okay, so that right there is my modeling. Often, many times, I would actually do the modeling in the context of the text. Like I'm not going to necessarily have word cards for every strategy, but because it was a decoding strategy, it can be nice to like pull words out and just, you can do things with color and underlining. For some decoding strategies, it's nice to have word cards. But now what I want us to do is actually take what we did with the word cards and apply it as we reread the text. So we would be starting over at the beginning. Again, this is a book that we've read before, and we would ideally be choral reading. And so I would say, okay, as we reread a little more of this, I want you to look for words that end with S. And so when the kids would find one, because this would be under the document camera so they could see it clearly, when they find one, they would help me use that strategy of covering up the S at the end, because I would have modeled that multiple times here. Okay. So there's different words that you can do in the book. Like I would have picked a book that had different options. Like in this book, sleeps, wants, comes, there's all sorts of things that we could encounter. So that was really the interactive or guided practice part of the lesson, right? Because I was modeling mostly with these cards, and then we were rereading part of the book, not the whole book, and the kids were looking for those words and telling me what to do with my hand to cover up the S. So then I would wrap up with the charge and I'd say, remember, you can try out this strategy on your own too. If you find a word that has an S ending, like these words we looked at, you can write it on a sticky note. And then during sharing time today, you can share those S ending words with a partner. And that's it. I reminded the kids what we learned and how to try it out on their own during reading time. And then during sharing time, after the kids read independently, I would look to see if the kids actually wrote down words that end with S. We would talk about a few of them as a class and they could share with a partner. So that was an example of a mini lesson. Again, I know it doesn't flow quite as nicely as if you were watching me teach it, but hopefully that gave you a better sense of how quick the connection was and the objective, because I really combined those. An example of what your modeling could be, and then how the kids are practicing by helping you find those words and use the cover up the S strategy in the actual book, and then the charge. All right, I know I missed a lot of wonderful questions and I apologize. Let me see if I can grab one or two. Melissa's asking, is this based on Lucy Calkins' Readers and Writers Workshop? So Lucy Calkins has one version of Reading and Writing Workshop. I don't believe that she invented Reading and Writing Workshop. I don't know who did, but this stuff that I'm doing, I have not used her reading mini lessons. I haven't actually used her current writing mini lessons either, but I know that it follows the workshop approach. And so hopefully you should be able to take what I'm telling you and also stuff in the freebie, stuff in the bundle that I have if you have one, and apply it. It's not going to be an exact match. It's not based on her approach or whatever. It's based on the Reading and Writing Workshop approach. I do have sample schedules, by the way, and I will be sharing those for sure in the freebie. All right. Again, I apologize for missing questions. At the end, I'll answer as many as I can. Just want to keep moving to hopefully keep us on track because we've got a long one today. All right, so we've talked about mini lesson. Now let's think back to our daily routine, right? After the mini lesson comes independent reading time, and that's when the kids are practicing all these strategies that they're learning by reading real books or pretend reading real books, right? If they can't read yet. They're also getting to choose books that they want to read. I'm not telling them, you have to read this, and you have to read that, and you have to read that. I do provide guided choice, and I'll show you how I do that in a minute. But they are basically choosing what they want to read. The kids are all reading at the same time, the way I do it. And this independent reading time might be quiet, but it's not necessarily silent. If you teach kinder or first grade where the kids are still whisper reading to themselves, then you might hear a little noise. The kids are not supposed to be talking, but it's not necessarily a silent reading time. Alrighty. So for independent reading time, of course, the kids are going to need books. And the easiest and fastest way to give kids access to books for independent reading time is just to have them maintain some kind of book bag or book box that contains books that they can read and books that they want to read. So for my like book containers or whatever, I like to ask local stores or organizations to donate like those canvas, or not even canvas, just like fabric reusable shopping bags like you would get at the grocery store, or like different organizations have them. A lot of times they'll be willing to donate, and those make really nice and sturdy book bags, as long as you have a hook to hang it up on. If you don't have that much space, then you might want to reconsider, but that's worked well for me. They're sturdy, they hold up over time. And when it comes to checking out books, I have them get their books by guided reading groups. So like the green group always gets books on Monday, and the yellow group always gets books on Tuesday. So they have that consistent routine. You can also do by tables. This table gets books on Monday. I made these little bookmarks for you. If you don't have them yet, they're in the freebie that is coming at the end here. If you want to give your kids like an assigned book checkout day, that's nice too. They have the bookmark and they always know when they go and get new books. So let's talk a little bit more about that book checkout process and maintaining a book bag. Generally, I have my kindergartners keep 10 books in their bag. For first graders, at the beginning of the year, they can have 10 books as well because they tend to go through books more quickly. Maybe you get down to 8 once they're actually doing a little more reading. Second grade, maybe start out with 6 books, get down to 4, because if they're reading chapter books, they really don't need to have tons and tons of books in there, but it also kind of depends on the level of your kids. I organize my library by genre or topic. So, we have animal books, or we'll have like fantasy books, or it just kind of depends on what the grade level is. And then the books that don't fall into anywhere, I just have like general fiction or general nonfiction. And so it's not leveled. I'll talk in a second what I do to guide their level choices. But the vast majority of my library, my classroom library, is organized like this, where I got these bins from Target like 10 or more years ago, but they've been really sturdy. They've held up well for books. And I know it's small to see, but I attach little binder rings with a laminated sturdy card that has the name of like the genre or topic, and then a little sticker. So it's like a little yellow sticker down here, if you can see that. And so that tells the kids, oh, if I have a book with a yellow sticker on, then it goes in this bin. And sometimes there's more than one. How do I explain this? There's more than one bin has the same color, and that's fine, because like not all of my general fiction books would fit into this one. There might be more than one bin with a yellow sticker, and that's fine. They just know it can go into any of the yellow bins. Then I've got green stickers and blue stickers, etc., etc. So that's how I organize my library. And then I tell my kids that half of their books can come from absolutely anywhere they want. They can choose the books they want to read. I teach them how to pick books that are a good fit for them, books that they enjoy reading. And then half of their books, I have them pull from a guided choice bin. And so this is where I really make sure that they are not picking, for example, books that are way too hard for them or books that are way too easy for them all of the time, because half of their books come from these guided choice bins. These are not labeled by level or anything like that. They're just color coordinated for guided reading groups. So the green guided reading group knows that they go to their green bin, and half of their books come from there. And in that green bin, I'll put books that we've either read during guided reading or books that I know are going to be easy enough that are at their independent reading level. So again, half of their books come from their guided choice bin, and then their guided reading bin, really. And then half of their books come from anywhere in the classroom library. And I do for sure teach about finding good fit books, and we'll talk about this right here. But I have found in my experience, A, for like kindergartners, it's a hard concept to get. And B, for students, especially students that are struggling, first grade, second grade, probably even beyond, they want to see that they're reading the same books as their peers are. So if they're low, if they're not able to read those books, they might feel self-conscious, and they might be trying to pull those books anyway. And so that's why choosing just right books can be a hard thing. I think it's something that's important and helpful to teach, but that half and half rule, where they get half from the classroom library, half from the guided reading bin, that helps with this. And then, if you're teaching first or second grade, maybe by the end of the year, they can select 100% of their books, and you don't need to give them that guided choice bin. But it really honestly depends on your students and how old they are too. So, to teach kids how to choose good fit books for their independent reading, I model what it sounds like when you're enjoying a book and also what it sounds like when you're not enjoying a book. And I've kind of gotten away from using language like good fit or too hard because I'm concerned that when I say that a book is too hard, I'm worried that it's communicating the idea that hard things are bad, and hard things aren't bad, right? Productive struggle can be really great when it comes to reading. It's just more about reading enjoyment. You know, when they self-select text, if something's way too hard for them, they're not going to enjoy their reading if it's incredibly difficult for them. I think where I originally heard this language from of enjoying a book and not enjoying a book, I believe I heard it from a presentation by Donna Lynn Miller. Not this exact slide, but the language of saying, are you enjoying a book or are you not enjoying a book? And I just found it really helpful. So enjoying a book means that you're interested in it, you can read most of the words, and you understand the text. If you're not enjoying a book, well, maybe you're just not interested in it, right? We've all picked up books and not, found like, oh, this isn't for me. Or maybe you're just having a hard time reading it because it's so hard to figure out the words. Or maybe you can read the words, but you have no idea what the author is saying. Like, you just don't understand it all. So, my reading workshop units, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute, those are connected in the big giveaway today. Those do include some lessons to help kids choose just right books. And if you have one of those, they are in Unit 1, so you can look for them there. These are things that I teach when I'm introducing procedures and routines for reading workshop at the beginning of the year. But honestly, it's something that I have to revisit throughout the year. It's not like I can teach this once and they remember it forever. Okay, just stretching all over here. So remember, I mentioned this earlier, pre-readers can also participate fully in reading workshop. You can model for them how to do things like make up a story from the pictures, right? Kids need to learn to look at pictures closely, and some early reading behavior that we see in toddlers, preschoolers, is that they'll look at the pictures of a book and they'll kind of like have this story language they're using. They're making something up. They're learning to interact with books. Now, not all of our students will come into kindergarten or first grade, depending on what your kids are like, knowing how to do this. They may not have had a lot of experience with books in the past. So this is something we can show them. If you can't read the words, you can look at the pictures. You can see what's going on in the story. You can also show them or teach them that they can retell or pretend read a familiar story using the pictures for support. At the beginning of kinder, I like to read a lot of books like The Three Billy Goats Gruff, The Three Little Pigs, things where, they'll kind of remember a lot of the words and they're just memorable. There's repetition. The stories are really engaging. And so if you read one of those books to the class, then you can make a couple of copies available to them, and they love keeping those books in their bags and retelling or pretend reading that story. Another thing you can teach them is how to study the pictures of nonfiction to learn facts about a topic, right? They can look at a picture of an elephant and learn like, oh, the elephant uses its trunk to drink water or whatever. You can also teach your kids that they can pretend read familiar poems or song lyrics. If you've done something with shared reading, you have it up on the board, give them a little copy. They can read or pretend read that. They might recognize letters or certain sight words, even if they can't read the whole thing. So these are all options for your pre-readers. You can start reading workshop at the beginning of kindergarten, and it's going to be appropriate as long as you make it appropriate. They're building stamina. They're learning to pay more attention to books, right? Not to just flip, I'm done, right? They're learning to engage with them more. And so those are skills they need to learn before they can really start to read, especially if you have kids that haven't had a lot of like early literacy experiences coming into your classroom. Something that comes up a lot when we talk about kids reading independently is how do we hold them accountable? And I will say that I don't have my students write about every single little thing they read. I really want independent reading time to be mostly about reading. You can have them write some on sticky notes, do a little bit of reading journals or a combination. And those can be helpful, both in getting kids to think more deeply about their reading, but also for accountability. And then, of course, reading logs are always an option too. Sometimes it wastes time for them to copy down titles, especially with our youngest students, but maybe you have a couple of kids that are struggling with reading enough, or you really want to encourage them in some way. Maybe you just have those couple of kids keep reading logs. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you implement with the whole class. So back to, I also wanted to mention an example of like a sticky note activity. maybe you're focusing on vocabulary, have them write down a new vocabulary word on a sticky note. Simple, right? Or write down an inference they made. Or, like with kindergarten, first grade, draw a face to show how the character is feeling on this page. It can be very simple. In their reading journal, they can write more about a sticky note that they wrote or drew. They can write about something standard like character setting, problem solution, or like 3 facts that they learned. Really, the options are endless. And if you want to do some of this stuff, you can just have them keep like a reading journal, a pencil, sticky notes in their reading bag or their reading box so that they always have access to them. If you have some little readers who tend to get off task during independent reading time, the first thing I try to focus on is engagement. So, help them try new genres or books. Try to find something that they love. You can also just ask them, hey, like, what's getting in the way of you staying focused? Like, why is this happening? You can also, something I recommend is praising whatever small amount of on-task reading they can accomplish. So even if they can read for 1 minute, like praise that, focus on that, building on the positive. And if none of that works, I might give them a sheet where they have to self-reflect on their behavior during reading workshop, and you can discuss that together at the end of every reading workshop period, just a quick check-in. This is what that sheet looks like, something like this, and this is in your freebie if you want to use this with your kids. But when you're helping your off-task readers get on task, just something to keep in mind is we never want reading to be a punishment, right? Like we never want this to be something negative. We want to figure out why are kids off task and try to problem solve that and really try to get them engaged in books and not making it seem like this is some kind of punishment or like they just have to do this. The more you can get kids motivated, engaged in what they're reading, the more successful you're going to be in getting them back on task. So, I know this is a lot of information, but I also want to talk briefly about one-on-one reading conferences. And that is something that I do while the kids are reading independently. And I will check in with my kids, provide some individualized instruction. And again, I do have guided reading or small groups at a different time of the day. This reading workshop, the way I do it, its independent reading time is really pretty short. So I only get through maybe 1 or 2 conferences, and that's okay. My conferences usually last about 5 minutes, and I often have to use a timer to keep myself from going over time, as I am apt to do that. Okay, so in a typical conference, this is what it usually looks like for me. Are we still in one-on-one reading conferences? Yeah, that's what we were supposed to be on, Amy. In a minute here, it should switch to typical conferring structure. Okay, so I did not make up this procedure, whatever, not sure where it came from. Jennifer Saravallo has some great books about conferring that I would recommend. I'm not sure that she necessarily came up with this structure, but this is what I use. This is what's been helpful to me. So when you observe students or a child, you can have the child that you're meeting with read a small part of the book that they're already reading. They can read that aloud to you, or you can just ask them something really simple like, what are you reading about today? Or what's happening in your story, just to kind of figure out where their comprehension is. After I observe what they're doing, I will compliment something that I notice them doing well. And it can be something as simple as the fact that like, hey, you've picked a book and you're really enjoying it, or you're using sticky notes in a smart way. And complimenting them helps them gain confidence, but it also sometimes puts into words something that they didn't realize that they were doing. So for example, you might say something like, wow, I can tell you remembered what the character said at the beginning of the book, and then you use that information to predict what the character will do next. Keep on noticing those details and using them to make predictions. So you're like encouraging that. And then last, at the end of the conference, I'll teach them something briefly, something that can move them forward in their reading. Often it's a strategy that they're using inconsistently, like maybe sometimes they're breaking up words, or maybe it's a strategy you taught in whole group, but they're not using it yet. It's easier to teach something that they're kind of familiar with than it is to introduce something brand new. And then at the end, I just like to restate, hey, today we talked about this. I'm going to come back and check and see how you're doing with this, tomorrow or next week or something like that. And just encourage the child to keep doing whatever we talked about in their reading. Okay. One of the hardest things about conducting conferences is that it can be difficult to figure out what to teach the student, at least in my opinion. And sometimes I do go into a conference knowing like, hey, this student needs to work on this strategy, but often I want the conference to be responsive to whatever I notice about the student that particular day, just as he's reading to me or we're discussing the book. And sometimes a strategy will just jump out at you as you're working with the child. But if it doesn't, the first thing I'll ask myself is, would today or this week's focus strategy be relevant to the student? Does the child need more support with it, right? Because if you can tie what you're doing in whole group to what, the child is doing one-on-one, like that's ideal, right? But sometimes that focus strategy isn't what the student needs. Maybe there's a related strategy that's easier or more challenging that is relevant to the student. So here are some examples of relevant strategies where you're taking your main focus strategy for the whole group and adjusting it to better meet the needs of individual students in your class. So, by the way, you should be seeing relevant strategy example slide, hopefully. I think it just might be a little bit slow. Sorry, I didn't miss some people saying it didn't change. But in a second, you should be seeing relevant strategy example here. So again, we're talking about taking what we're focusing on with the whole class and making it relevant to every child, right? So let's say with the whole class, you're working on inferring character traits. So if you're not familiar with that, it's just, oh, well, this character is brave because he did this, or this character is kind because she did this. Inferring character traits. And with some of your kids, like you teach that whole group and then you're working with your kids one-on-one and you can work on that same skill with them, like it's relevant to them. But sometimes you have kids that are struggling with that skill, like it's out of reach, it's too hard. They can practice identifying the characters, just who are the characters in the book, or inferring a character's feelings, or inferring why a character did something. However, maybe for some of your kids, inferring character traits is pretty easy and they're just coming up with words and it's not hard. If you have students who have already mastered this skill, maybe they're inferring character traits, but they're also using that information to make predictions about what characters will do next. So this is an example of taking what you're working on whole group and making it relevant to different levels in your class. In your freebie, I put a bunch of what I call skill continuums there to help guide you in finding relevant strategies. And there are instructions for how to use those skill continuums in the freebie, but basically they're just a ladder of related skills from easiest at the top to more challenging at the bottom. So you can pick a relevant skill for a student that's related to what you're working on in your workshop as a whole. Okay. So we talked about that observe, compliment, teach routine for conferences, but not all of my conferences are exactly like that. Sometimes instead we're just, talking about what a child has picked to read, or we're following up on a previous conference's strategy, or we are doing a check-in about how they're responding to their reading. It's not necessarily like every single one of your conferences have to follow this model. Sometimes you're just checking in or looking at something specific. My conferences tend to go quickly, right? Like I feel like, I try to keep them to 5 minutes. You want them to be impactful. So I find it helpful to use a conferring bag. So I have all the stuff that I need in one place. And so I physically move to where students are so that we don't waste time with them coming over to my table. So I just grab this bag and I go directly to them. And in the conferring bag, I usually keep a timer to help myself stay on track with limiting my conferences to about 5 minutes. I may have an example book or two in the genre that we're working on, so I can quickly model something if I need to. That's something nice to keep in there. I always have the central goals of the unit in my bag so that I can quickly scan and see if I can help the student I'm conferring with work on one of those main goals. And so this also helps you, if you have this list of what you're working on in the unit, this helps you with knowing what to teach when you work with students. And if you use my reading workshop units, make sure to print off those class checklists because you have this list done for you already. And then on the right here, you can also see that I have these little strategy cards. And sometimes to help my students remember what they're supposed to be practicing, I'll give every child a little binder ring like this one. You can just get them from office supply stores. And when I teach them a strategy, I may give them a card to put on their binder ring that goes with the strategy. They usually just keep like 2 or 3 cards total. It's not like all the strategies they know, but what I want them to focus on. And they serve as a visual reminder of what strategies they should be focusing on as they're reading. So they just keep those little card rings in their independent reading bags or bins. And if you have my reading workshop units, my shared reading units, you have these included in those units. And again, I'll talk more about those in a little bit. So these are just some tools that I have available to me and the kids during independent reading time. And then last but not least, I mentioned at the very beginning here that we always wrap up our reading workshop with shared reading. With sharing time, not shared reading. And that lasts about 5 minutes. And it's tempting to skip sharing time and rush onto something else for sure. But sharing time is so valuable because it helps kids process what they've been reading about, and it gives them an audience for some of the notes. Maybe they've written some stuff on sticky notes or in their reading journals. It gives them someone to share that with. They can even just share, part of the text that they liked, or just by seeing what their partner's reading, get an idea for what they want to read next time. So there's lots of things that sharing time accomplishes. And the way I structure it kind of varies from day to day. Sometimes I'll give them guidance on what to discuss, like, hey, I want you guys to talk about a tricky word that you found in your book. Sometimes I may have requested, like, at the beginning in the mini lesson, for your partner today, like actually I did this in the example mini lesson, I want you to find words that end with an S or whatever the focus strategy is. So sometimes I will have asked them ahead of time to prepare something, and that's what they share. And then sometimes I just allow them to choose, like, hey, like, talk to your partner about something that you liked, or talk to your partner about whatever you want, something from your book today. So it's always focused on what they were reading during independent reading time, but the amount of guidance that I provide does vary. In your freebie, you'll find some example prompts that you can use to get students started during sharing time. These are just sentence starters. You would obviously want to teach each one and not use all of them at once. You'd want to introduce one at a time and let them get comfortable with it. But hopefully that's something that can help you structure your sharing time if that's something that you struggle with or you just haven't tried sharing time yet. All right, so let me see if I can grab a question or two. So Megan's asking, how many cards did you say? So for this little one, I usually give the kiddos only 2 or 3 cards on a ring. So it's not all of the strategies that they know. It's really just what strategies do I most want them to be focusing on. Oh, Christy said they also have binder rings at the 99-cent store or dollar store. Awesome. Anne says, do you have some kids that you have to check in with every day? I'm thinking you're lower readers. Yeah, so that's tricky, Anne, because I don't want the conferring time to just be about my lower readers, but what I will do is I may check in with them very quickly and not have like a true conference, but then we move on and, I'll do some more in-depth conferences with other readers. And of course, my lower readers do get in-depth conferences, but even if I have to just do a little check-in, that can help too. Katie says, how long do you generally plan to spend on a strategy/skill for your mini lessons and modeling? Katie, I'm not sure if you mean like on a daily basis or over time. Over time, I like to, and there's some research to support this, I'll introduce a strategy, we'll work on a little bit, and then we'll come back later in the year and work on it some more. But in terms of like in one day, a mini lesson is typically about like 10 minutes long. Okay, I am seeing some questions that we're going to get to eventually. Oh, Heather and Anna, I do want to answer your questions though, because that pertains to what we were just talking about. So they were asking during sharing time at the end of the workshop, were they sharing with just a partner or the whole class? And so what I do, I didn't explain this right, they do share with a partner first. So every single child gets to share every day, which they love. But then I may have like 1 or 2 students share out with the whole class. So like if I notice somebody doing a fantastic job with the strategy or just doing something interesting that the whole class might want to know about or might benefit from, then I will pick 1 or 2 kids to share with the whole class. But so that every child gets to share every day, we do share first with a partner. So hopefully that makes more sense. All right, so we're about to dive into writing workshop. I'm going to take a bathroom break. If you need to go to the bathroom or get a drink or anything, feel free to do that. I'm going to be super quick, but I will be back in 1 minute and then we will get going. I normally don't do this, but since this is 2 hours long, I thought everybody might appreciate a break, and I know I need one before I train my bladder again to get back to school time. So I will be back in 1 minute. I feel like I should have some like elevator music to play, but I don't. But I'll be back super short, and you go ahead and grab what you need during our break. Okay, I am back. Hopefully you had a chance to grab what you needed. I see some more awesome questions. I'll try to grab one or two more here. Okay, so I have seen some people asking about lists of strategies, and what I would recommend if you don't have a list of strategies, I don't know that I included it in the freebie. The freebie again is coming after at the end here, at the end of our 2 hours. And if I did not include lists, which I'm not sure that I did, what I would recommend is going to my Teachers Pay Teachers store, and I will give you the link for that. But I have reading and writing workshop bundles, and if you just look at the preview, you can see lists of the lessons. And so even if you don't use my bundle, if you have something else, you can see lists of the strategies that I teach just by looking at the preview files. So that would be something that might be helpful. Heather recommends Reading with Meaning by Debbie Miller, and I'm going to second that recommendation. I haven't read it in a long time, but it was a great read. All right. Well, we are over an hour, so let's go ahead and get started with our writing workshop portion. So remember, up next we have writing workshop. We have the talking about how reading and writing workshop can kind of fit together, and then we have our giveaway. So hopefully you can stick around for one more hour. I know that today's a long one, but we've got some good stuff coming up. Okay, so the good news is that since we've already gone over reading workshop, you actually already know a lot about writing workshop because writing workshop is a daily structure. Sound familiar? For teaching writing with a mini lesson, independent writing time, sharing time. So same kind of structure. If you get what reading workshop's all about, then writing workshop is not all that far off. Writing workshop also, like reading workshop, provides for student choice. So I usually pick the genre, and then kids are picking topics within the genre. So for example, let's say that we are all writing personal narratives. Personal narratives are true stories from our lives. They're also sometimes called small moment stories. And maybe I'm specifying that that's what we're all working on, but then one child's writing about when they went to the zoo, and another child's writing about when they broke their arm. So I'm picking the genre, and the kids are picking topics within the genre. You don't necessarily have to do it like that, but that's what works well for me. So every day, just like with reading workshop, our writing workshop consists of the mini lesson, which is usually about 10 minutes. Then the kids write for as long as possible, 20 to 30 minutes. And then we wrap up with sharing time at the end that's about 5 minutes. So in comparison to reading workshop, the mini lesson, about the same time, sharing time about the same time. And then you'll notice that writing time is a little longer. And the reason for this is that when it comes to reading, my kids have quite a few other opportunities, I'll say, to read independently. So they have independent reading time during centers. Then they're reading with me during guided reading. And so with writing, even if I do have a writing center, the writing workshop tends to be when we're doing, I would say, the majority of our writing. Now, let's say that you have a lot of other writing opportunities throughout your day, then you might not need 20 to 30 minutes. And at the beginning of the year, of course, you're not necessarily going to have 20 to 30 minutes, especially with kindergarten. They're just drawing for like 5 minutes. But when I'm thinking about how long I want that independent practice block to be, I'm thinking about what other opportunities for writing in this case, or for reading, do I have sprinkled throughout the day? So it's not really practical, I would say, to think about your timing just looking at reading workshop or just looking at writing workshop. You have to look at your whole day. And I don't remember if I mentioned this earlier, but in your freebie, I have sample schedules for kinder, first, and second. Those links are coming to you soon. But when you're choosing how long this block is, A, think about the beginning of the year, how long they're going to be able to start with. But B, think about like what other opportunities for writing they may have during the rest of your literacy block. Okay, so as I mentioned, we start with a mini lesson, and a mini lesson is brief. 10 minutes is kind of like my sweet spot, 5 minutes at the very beginning of the year. Sometimes my mini lesson will run 15 minutes if it's more involved, if it's more interactive and the kids are doing more, but generally I aim for 10 minutes. Mini lessons, just like the reading workshop mini lessons, are designed to be focused. So like you saw me focusing on just one strategy with this like covering up the S. With writing, it's the same thing. It's like one specific writing strategy. Like here's how to add transition words to your writing, or here's how to draw by adding details to people's faces. So the more focused and specific you can be, the better. And then the outcome of a mini lesson, and this actually applies to reading workshop too, the outcome is not complete student mastery. It would be fabulous if I could teach my mini lesson and then the kids immediately get it and they're like able to do it forever. Typically though, you're just introducing something, and where the rubber meets the road is where the kids are actually writing independently, or in the case of reading workshop, reading independently. That's where they begin to start to understand better, and then you also revisit the strategy later. I never revisit a strategy just once during the year. And for the mini lesson format, for reading workshop, I had that nice little acronym. I don't have a nice little acronym for the writing one, but honestly, it's very similar to reading. So you can probably take that comic acronym and apply it to your writing workshop. So with your writing workshop mini lesson, generally what I do is I state my teaching point. This is what I want them to learn. I'll do some modeling or demonstration. There's some kind of student interaction or guided practice, and then I restate the teaching point. So I didn't break it down with this acronym, but honestly, you totally can. You can use that comic acronym for writing workshop as well. So I do, just like I did an example of reading workshop, I want to do a little writing workshop example. And let's say that my focus strategy for the day is writing with more details, but not just writing with details in general, because that's very broad. I want my kids to add more details about characters' actions. So what are characters doing step by step? Okay. So I might start by saying something like, okay, first graders, you've been working really hard on your fiction stories, and you know that in a few weeks, we're going to be sharing our stories with the kindergarten class. So I'm kind of like setting the stage here, motivating them to get their stuff done so they can share with the kindergartners. And I'll say, today I want to teach you a strategy to make your stories even more interesting for your kindergarten friends. And I'm going to show you how to add more details that tell what characters are doing. So there I've stated my objective. At this point, I would put this little sheet under the document camera. Now there's so many different ways to model. This is just one example that I'm giving you. I do model in many different ways. And so if you can't read this because it's very small, it just says, Danny and Emma walked to the shop. They bought ice cream. So it's like a mini paragraph. So I, before this lesson, would have planned out in my head, like, how am I going to take this, mini paragraph and stretch it out? So I would say something like, okay, so let's say that I wrote, Danny and Emma walked to the shop. They bought ice cream. That's fine, but I could add a whole lot of more little details to tell what my characters are doing. So now I actually take under the document camera, this is under the document camera, and I'm writing, Danny and Emma said goodbye to their mom and went out the front door. They walked down the street and talked about what they thought the flavor of the day was going to be. Danny hoped it would be chocolate chip, and Emma hoped it would be cotton candy. When they got to the end of the street, they turned the corner and started walking even faster toward the ice cream shop. Danny and Emma burst through the door and looked for the flavor of the day sign. It was cotton candy. Emma cheered. Danny was disappointed, but he was still happy with his chocolate ice cream. They each bought a sugar cone with 1 scoop of ice cream, paid the cashier, and sat down to eat their treats. So obviously that was a whole lot more details than just this mini paragraph. Am I expecting my students to write at that level? Not necessarily, but I'm showing them what's possible. So with that little modeling example, I would, again, be modeling that, and I would have to have that in my head already, more or less, because if I'm like thinking of it on the fly, it just takes a lot longer to write it out. So then after I do that, we might have a quick discussion, like, what details did I add that weren't there before? And have them point out specific things that I wrote. What do you think about my paragraph now? Is it more interesting to read? Just talking about the differences between that mini paragraph and then all the details. And by the way, this is like a first grade lesson that I'm not going to teach at the beginning of the year. This is like a mid-end of year lesson. And the modeling that I do varies depending on my students' levels. So I don't want it to be so ridiculously advanced, my modeled writing, that it's like way out of reach, but nor do I want it to be like low or middle, because I want them to reach for the stars. I want to show them what's possible, because kids will really surprise you. They can do a lot. So just wanted to make that point. This is not a beginning of the year lesson, and I always pay attention to where my kids are at when I'm determining what to write. So that was the little modeling. I have to keep that pacing quick because now I want the kids to practice. And so with the kids practicing, what I like to do is I'll take something similar. So this is just another mini paragraph. Christina rode her bike to the park. She played with her friend Mike, and I have the kids tell me, how could I, if you think about a slinky, how could I expand this paragraph? How could I add more details about what the characters are doing? And I have them help me write that all out. Now, if it ends up taking too long, this teacher modeling could be one day, and then the next day, maybe the kids help me. I try to fit it into one day so we have the modeling and the student practice, or the interactive guided practice there. But if you have to, you can always break it up. Okay, so then at the end of the lesson, I might wrap up by saying something like, today I showed you how to add more details about what the characters are doing. So today and every day, first graders, as you are writing, you can add more details about what your characters are doing, and that will make your stories even more interesting to read. And then I dismiss them to start working on their writing. Now, again, this is just one option. Another thing I could have done is maybe I would do this teacher modeling, but then maybe, which is even more relevant, I would have them go back to their seats and pick a story that's like finished or almost finished. And maybe I would have them work with a partner to actually revise something from their own writing. That's another option too. If possible, I like them to be revising their own writing or adding to their own writing. So there's lots of different ways that I could have taught this. And then another great thing that I did that I wasn't able to fit in that lesson is you can use a mentor text, either instead of your modeled writing or in addition to it. And a mentor text is just a published text that students can learn something about writing from. So maybe, one of your books that you've read to your kids that has really great verbs in it, or it's really focused on one topic. You can have the kids learn from published text, maybe that you're reading during your read aloud. I find it's important to read the text once so that we can focus on just understanding and enjoying the story or the book the first time. And then I'll later bring it back into the mini lesson and say, okay, how can we look at this as writers? What can we, learn about from this book as writers? So it's not like I'm necessarily reading a whole book and then having them analyze it for like a writing focus point in one lesson. The reading the book happens at one point and then we analyze it at a different time. And so if it seems like a lot to do, just think about what books you're reading for your read alouds. You can use a book that you use for a read aloud as you're writing mentor text. You're just asking the kids to look at it differently. Let's see, anything else? Oh, in your freebie, there is a link to a big list of mentor text suggestions by genre. So that is in there for you. All right, so we've talked about the mini lesson with writing, just like reading workshop. Now we're going to have some independent student work time, and in this case, they are writing. So just like with reading workshop, independent writing time is really the most important part of your workshop because that's when kids are getting the practice that they need. So we want to make independent writing time as long as possible. As I mentioned, obviously look at your literacy block as a whole and think about how much writing time you really need. But in order to get our kids to be able to write for a while, we have to build their stamina. They have to physically be able to write or draw for an extended period of time, right? They have to be able to focus. So I really recommend starting out small at the beginning of the year or whenever you start writing workshop, and then gradually increasing the amount of time that students are writing by add a minute or two a day. You can take a big sheet of chart paper and graph students' progress. That's really motivating. Hey, yesterday we wrote for 7 minutes. Today we wrote for 8 minutes. Good job. If your kids are having trouble staying on task, what I recommend is ending writing time and then canceling sharing time. Okay, so if kids are off task and they're just not doing what they're supposed to be doing, not one child, but a bunch of children, if they're off task, end writing time, come back, cancel sharing time, and talk about what went wrong. That can help build stamina too, like getting them to self-reflect and how to improve. How do we build more stamina? The next day, maybe you start with less writing time and you build your way back up. And it's totally okay to take a step backwards in order to take a few steps forward. So this is true at the beginning of the year, but also throughout the year if your kids are struggling. Cancel sharing time, talk about what went wrong, back up the number of minutes that you're writing for, and then build back up. Okay, yeah, it looks like the slide was a little bit slow to change. Sorry about that. So what we were just talking about is building stamina and getting kids to, start small in terms of what you expect at the beginning of the year and then working their way up. Okie doke. So in writing workshop, kids are all working on different topics. They're also at different places in the writing process. We talked about what the different topics thing looks like before, where like with the personal narratives example, one child's working on when they went to the zoo and others working on when they broke their arm. But in terms of them being at different places in the writing process, if you haven't used the workshop model, this can kind of be like a little bit hard to wrap your mind around, but you probably already know that kids work at different paces, right? Like some of your kids are super slow writers and some of them just like go, go, go. So basically, some kids in your workshop, they may be planning a new story. Other kids may be almost done with a story or in the middle of a story or beginning a story, and that's okay. You just teach them that when they finish one piece, then they move on and they start another piece. So there's always something else for them to do, and finishing early doesn't really exist. Because like with that personal narratives example, okay, you finished your personal narrative of when you went to the zoo. What else has happened to you in your life? What about, did you ever get hurt? Did you ever go on a special vacation? Did you ever have a fight with a friend? Like there's other topics that they can write about. And toward the beginning of the unit, I do provide more structure, right? Like we're not all, when we start a unit, I want them all to be brainstorming. We're all practicing brainstorming together, and then we're all starting to write our pieces, even if it's on different topics, and then we're all kind of maybe editing. So at the beginning of the unit, it's not necessarily that free-flowing. But once they finish a piece and they've had my support with it, at that point, I'm just kind of like, okay, like when you finish a piece, start another one, start another one, start another one. So hopefully that makes sense. It also does make your life easier because you're not worried about kids finishing early because they always just start a new piece. Okay, so because the kids are not all on the same page in terms of where they are in the writing process, I have to make different paper options available to them. And, this really depends what grade you teach and what time it is in the year. I don't ever start, especially not like kindergarten or first grade, I don't ever start with just like making all these different paper options available to them, but we build up over time. So once we've introduced graphic organizers, which I don't do at the beginning of the year because I feel can be confusing, but once I've introduced them, then I make those available to the kids. And then I also will make writing paper available to the kids. Typically, I use these stapled booklets. 3 pages make really nice for like a beginning, 1 page, middle, and end. You could also, I typically only do this with second graders or maybe late first grade. You could do loose sheets where the kids staple them. I don't like to start the year that way at all. I like to give them these little booklets. But so those paper things are available to them. So whenever they need to start a new piece, they can grab new paper, or they can grab a brainstorming sheet, whatever they're doing. So where do they store this stuff, right? My preference is to use writing folders. And what I do for my students, like I buy them, and you can have them just bring them on their supply list, but I'll buy the folders that are like sturdy and also have prongs in the middle. And I'll show you why. I think I show you why, yeah, later on. But in my writing folder, we have a green dot side, which is where the papers go that they're still working on in progress, and the red dot side is for papers that are finished. So this helps them organize their folder a bit better. And the reason why I don't just immediately send home finished stuff is because I want to teach the idea that they can always improve and add on to their writing. And so often during mini lessons, I'll say like, hey, why don't you, now that we're done with this lesson, now go back to your folder, pull out a story that you're already finished with or you think you're done with, and then let's see if you can add this, or let's see if you can fix this. It's really nice for them to have pieces that they've been working on or that they're finished with available so that they can improve upon them in the future. Now, obviously, we have to clean out our folders every, I would say at least probably like once a month is what we do it, or once a unit. Ideally, it's nice to finish a unit and then have them clean out. But the red dot and the green dot does help them keep things organized. When I'm working with students in K2, I almost always use writing paper rather than journals or notebooks for my writing workshop. Because I really want my students, especially like the kinders, the first graders, I really want them to make that connection between we're reading books and we're making books, right? Like same thing, we're developing a concept of literacy. And so when young kids write in notebooks, what I found is that they tend to get confused. Like, where does their story begin in the notebook? Where does it end? There's no clear first or last page. So it just can be a little confusing. And then sometimes their stories just like take up pages and pages and they lose focus. And of course, like kids can get confused when they're writing on paper as well. But it's a little bit easier to explain to them, like, this is a book. Like, this first page is your beginning, this is your middle, and this is your end. To me, it just seems a little bit clearer. If notebooks work for you, go for it, but this is just what works well for me. All right, so that's the stuff the kids are writing on, and now I want to talk a little bit more about what we are doing during independent writing time, because the kids are writing independently, and our job is to do some teaching and also do some observation. What I prefer is to just take a few moments to make sure everybody's getting settled during independent writing time. But after that, I try to do mostly individual one-on-one writing conferences and teaching small groups. So this is kind of like reading workshop again, right? Doing lots of conferring, or as much as I have time for. And unlike reading workshop, where I was saying that I only really do conferring during independent reading time, during writing time, I may also do some small groups. Not every day, but this is my only time in my schedule, the way I do things, to pull writing small groups. So it's a little bit different from reading workshop, but again, your schedule may be a little bit different. So today we're already at an hour and a half. We don't have enough time to go super in depth on conferences or small groups, but we already talked about them in terms of reading workshop. And honestly, with writing workshop, it's kind of similar. When you're working one-on-one with a child, you get to sit down with them, observe what they're doing, which is really important when you have kinders and first graders and you can't read what they're writing yet. So you need for them to tell you, what they're trying to say in their writing. Just like with the reading conferences, you can give a compliment. Oh, I noticed you doing this, great job. And then teach one thing to help them move forward. Just like with the reading conferences, it's nice to work on something that they're familiar with. It can be hard in a 5-minute conference or 4 or 5 minute conference to teach something brand new. So again, it's the observe, compliment, teach structure that you can also use in writing workshop. Now, if you're doing any small group writing instruction, I usually spend like 10 minutes on those small groups. That's with like multiple kids, and you're doing something really similar. You're meeting with more than one student at a time. If you've got like 4 students who all have a similar need, it is more efficient to pull them together and be like, hey, like we all need to work on adding more details than it is to like run around to 4 different kids. So small groups can be a great way to make things more efficient. And I think that's all we have time for on small groups, but those are another, I feel like, effective way to address kids' individual needs during independent writing time. All right. Okay, let me see if I can answer a question or two. Megan, I just want to highlight what she said. She said, I've learned published means ready to make public or share. It doesn't always mean perfect or redone to look nice. We can do that way sometimes, but not often. It is time consuming. Thank you for saying that, Megan. I totally agree. Sometimes, yeah, if we're going to have, a big writing celebration and I want things to look really nice, like, yes, we will, edit and go through this big revising process and copy things over and make a pretty cover. But that's not every piece that we do. When kids are finishing a piece, like maybe I'll give them a checklist to make sure that it's, they're making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, but it's not necessarily this like big published perfect piece. I don't expect perfection from like every single piece that they put out there. Don't expect perfection from even their like published piece. But yeah, I think that's a good point to make. Miriam says it's a terrible if they erase rather than cross out. Miriam, with my kids, often their racing turns crazy and it rips the paper, but it's really up to you. Another option is having them put like little sticky notes on top of their writing if they want to add something. Nancy says, last question, then we'll move on. Do you ever write the translation under what the child wrote? Sometimes you can't read what they write. So Nancy, sometimes I do. I am cautious about that just because I don't really like to write on their work. I feel like that's their work. And if they're going to make changes, it needs to come from them. That develops ownership. Sometimes with like kinder at the beginning of the year, if they want to dictate something to me about their picture, then I might. But I try to give them a lot of ownership. Okay, I know I have missed questions and I apologize, but I want to keep rolling because we have the giveaway coming soon. I want to make sure that you're able to stay live or stick around for that so you can be here live and be entered. Even, I didn't mention this earlier, but even if you already have the resources in the giveaway, you can pick something different in my TPT store. So there's something for everybody, even if you happen to have one of my bundles already. All right, so we've talked about independent writing time, right? We talked about mini lesson, independent writing time. Now let's talk a little bit about sharing time. So this might sound familiar from Reading Workshop, but sharing time is about 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be finished work, right? They can show like their partner a page from something that they've been working on. It does not have to be that they've finished writing a book or whatever. Just like with Reading Workshop, they partner share first so that everybody gets to share every day. And I found that makes a big difference. And then maybe I'll pick like 1 or 2 kids to share a whole group. When I do pick kids to share a whole group, I often, select the writers beforehand. So, if I'm walking around and I notice that somebody's doing a really great job with this, or they're making progress with that, I might ask them like, hey, during sharing time, would you like to share with the class? And so that saves a little bit of time and it helps me make sharing time more intentional. So very similar to Reading Workshop sharing, it's short, everybody gets to share, and then a couple people share out with the whole group. Alrighty, so we just went through the whole structure of mini lesson, independent writing time, and sharing time. And now I want to address a few other things that I think are relevant to Writing Workshop before we talk about Reading and Writing Workshop together. So one thing that I get asked a lot, or maybe you're wondering about this by now, is this Writing Workshop approach is very open-ended. Like I'm choosing a genre and the kids are choosing topics. And another valuable way of writing is prompts, right? Like when you give the kids something to write about where you're like, okay, write about a time in your life when you got sick, or, write, what do you think about school uniforms? Like giving kids specific things to write about. And the Writing Workshop model, to me, even though prompts aren't really used in it, it doesn't mean that we can't ever use prompts. And so what I will typically do is I'll teach a Writing Workshop unit on like nonfiction writing, for example. And then after that nonfiction unit is over, we'll spend a week, maybe 2 weeks, responding to nonfiction prompts. So throughout the year, I didn't used to do this, but I find it's really helpful to teach a genre or a unit of Writing Workshop, and that lasts longer, but then I'll follow that up with like a week or 2 of prompt writing in that same genre. So we alternate like unit prompts throughout the year. Okay, our last main part of the Writing Workshop component is I want to talk about getting our kids writing independently, because It's difficult with reading too, but I think one of the most challenging things about the workshop model is that the kids are so self-directed, and sometimes they just don't start the year like that. They feel very needy, like they really need our support with writing. And so I want to share with you, maybe I went through that slide too fast. I want to share with you 5 strategies that I use to promote independence. And if you're starting your school year now or soon, this is a great time to get started with this stuff, because when you lay the foundation to get them independent, when you do these things at the beginning of the year, it makes your life so much easier throughout the year. So I'm excited that a lot of us are starting the year soon-ish. We're already starting, because these are things that you can do right away and you'll really see the results all year long. Okay, so the first thing I do is I try to anticipate problems that the kids are going to have during independent writing time, and I teach them how to solve those problems on their own without needing me. I also set high expectations from the start. I provide visual supports and motivate them with writing celebrations, and I also do my best to stay consistent. So these are my top 5 strategies, and now we're going to go in depth on every one of them. All right, so one of the best ways to get students writing independently, really working independently without needing you for every single little thing, is to teach them how to solve their own problems. And so in order to do that, we need to anticipate and observe what problems our students encounter during writing time, and then create mini lessons to teach students how to solve those problems on their own. So again, this is a great time because a lot of you, I think most of us, have not started our school year yet. This is stuff that you can teach at the beginning of the year, and then of course revisit as needs. This list is in your freebie, by the way, so I'm not going to read it all to you because we're kind of short on time. But some problems that you might anticipate are your kids maybe get stuck, or they don't know what to write about. They don't know how to spell a word. They need to, go to the restroom, get a drink, whatever. So all of this, again, is in your freebie. And what I think is important is to teach our kids how to solve these problems without interrupting us, right? Because if we're conferring with kids, pulling small groups, if we get interrupted by this for something like getting a new piece of paper, like that's instructional time that's taken away from those students that we're trying to work with. With things like getting tape for their paper that's ripped, we might think like, oh my gosh, am I really going to make the tape available to kids? But if you really teach and reteach them how to use tape appropriately, they really can do this stuff on their own. I promise. It takes time, it takes instruction, but it will save you time down the road because they're not going to interrupt you every time they rip their paper. And again, I recommend teaching this stuff. The list is in your freebie at the beginning of the year, but I also revisit these same topics periodically as the year progresses, especially after like a long break. Okay, my second strategy for promoting student independence is to set high expectations from the very start. And it's never too late to reset your expectations, but we're in an advantage now in that it's the beginning of the year and this stuff starts at the very beginning. So, from the start of the school year, I require my students to come up with ideas, words, and sentences independently. Obviously, with Kinder, we're not necessarily doing sentences right away, but let me show you a little bit more about what I mean. So for ideas, during the first few days of school, or maybe on the first day, first, second grade, I might say something like, okay, like draw and write about your summer, or draw and write about your family. And so that's like a little bit of a prompt, right? Like I'm kind of telling them what to write about. But after that, like first day, basically, I completely stopped giving them prompts for at least a month or 2. Because what I'm trying to develop in my students is the ability for my kids to choose what they're going to draw and write about independently. And if you happen to use my writing units, you see that in the first unit, whether it's Kinder first or second, I don't give a lot of guidance at all. My Kinders can draw about whatever they want to draw about. And my first and second graders, I just have them writing stories, but it's really open-ended. It's like whatever they want to write about. In later units, I do specify the genre, like I was talking about earlier, like personal narratives or nonfiction, and they have choice within that genre. But the reason why I don't give them prompts or a lot of structure at the beginning of the year is because with some kids, I've found that if I do tell them, hey, write about this, write about that, then they get used to that. And when they need to be more like self-directed in choosing a topic, they can't. So it sounds kind of strange to go from like less support at the beginning of the year to more support. But I found that when you put that on them from the beginning, and of course you support them and teach them how to choose their own topics, it really sets you up for success throughout the entire year. So going along with having them, teaching them how to choose topics and all that good stuff, sometimes our kids are not going to know what to write about. And that's a very normal problem. This is something I address in mini lessons. Something you can do maybe toward the beginning or in the first month or two of school is address that and say, hey, if you don't know what to write about, try out one of these topics. This photo's in your freebie, but it just says a person or animal who's very important to you, a time when you felt a strong emotion, something you learned that really interested or excited you, something you do every day that you're good at, or something in your life that's unfair. So these are just kind of like some things that we would brainstorm as a class. This would be a whole mini lesson, making this chart. And then I'd post it, and that's something that they can refer back to throughout the year. And so if you have this tool in your classroom, when your kid comes to you, when your student comes to you and says, I don't know what to write about, your response isn't like, oh, well, maybe you can write about what you did this weekend, or you could write about our field trip. Your response is, well, where in the room could you look to get ideas? And so that, again, that encourages independence because the kids are going back to that chart and they learn not to come to you every single time they don't know what to write about. They learn to use that chart, and that's developing independence, which is our goal. So a photo of that chart is in your freebie. But another strategy I want to mention that I use to help my kids like not run out of topics is a beginning of the unit brainstorming sheet. So at the beginning of most of my writing workshop units, I have the kids brainstorm different topics within the genre that we're going to be working on. Because like I said, they're self-selecting topics, working at their own pace. When they finish a book or a piece of writing, they might need a new topic and they don't have one. So what they can do is go back to this initial brainstorming sheet, like this nonfiction one, get an idea, and then just keep on going. And so like this is just one example. There's different categories here. Like I think this is maybe first grade or second grade. We were writing nonfiction, and they came up with different things for their own like brainstorming sheets, their individual ones, but I gave categories like nature, people, places, activities. And so then they brainstormed little ideas within that subcategory. And I think this was second grade. So also, we've talked about them coming up with ideas on their own. I also expect them to spell words independently. And so obviously with kinder is a little different. They have to really learn how, most of our kinders have to learn how to like stretch out words and hear sounds. But a lot of kids, especially in first and second grade, they'll come into school and they're asking us to spell words for them, right? Like, oh, Mrs. Ryan, how do you spell this? And I never tell them how to spell a word during like the first 2 months of school. Instead of telling them how to spell it, I will respond with a question or a prompt like, what sounds do you hear in that word? Let's listen for the sounds. Say the word slowly with me. I'm not going to read all of these just in the interest of time, but in your freebie, there's this list of things that you can say when a child asks you how to spell the word or a word. And basically, you're just putting the responsibility back on them for figuring it out. Now, of course, you also have to teach spelling strategies, right? Like you can't just expect them to do it without having any support. And I do a lot of that at the beginning of the school year. I reinforce that with mini lessons throughout. And then eventually, of course, I'm going to give them some spelling help when we're publishing writing, or, if there's like a really long, like content specific word, like I do provide spelling help, but not at the beginning of the year because I need them to become self-reliant and know that they can figure out how to spell words. And of course, with kindergarten, that starts with labeling and all kinds of, alphabet instruction too. Basically, just wanted to mention with this slide too is I feel it's important to have a specific time for like teaching phonics or word study, spelling. And when you have that specific time, you also want to get kids to connect their writing time to that. So, hey, we've been working on words with short vowels. Let's see, can we apply this to our writing? So it's important to at least mention or make time for some activities to help kids make connections between what they're working on in spelling or word study with their writing. Because of course, the more they learn about spelling and phonics, the easier it is for them to write words, but they also need to understand that if they're practicing this at a different time of the day, it can help them in their writing time. And some kids will get that immediately, but with other kids, you have to be a little bit, clearer about that. Okay. So, although I do want my kids to become risk takers with their spelling, we do eventually start talking about, here's how to spell correctly. And it's important to spell the best that we can so that, other people can read our writing. It's important for them not just being, not just being able to use this invented or temporary spelling, but to also understand the value of spelling words correctly. And when we start talking about this, or just in general, when the kids come to me, some kids may become hesitant to try out and spell a word, to take a spelling risk. And so I have a little mini lesson for you that may help if you have some kids who are not wanting to spell words because they're worried about being wrong. So during this mini lesson, and the materials are in your freebie for you, I will show kids these two pieces of writing. Like I'll have them up on the interactive board or under the document camera. And I'll explain that, okay, if writers only write words that they know how to spell, our ideas can get trapped in our heads. We're not able to write everything that we want. And so then I'll have them compare and contrast these two pieces of writing. So on here, this just says, I have a cat, everything's spelled right. And then over here, it's like this whole long thing about my cat, and some of the words are spelled incorrectly. And so after I read that to them, we talk about which piece of writing is more interesting to read and why. And so then at the end of the lesson, I tell them, when you're writing, you should use your very best spelling, but you shouldn't get stuck writing only the words that you know how to spell. Because as you saw here, it's more important to get your ideas out. It makes the writing more interesting than it is if you only stay with those safe words that you already know how to spell. So this activity of comparing and contrasting, perfectly spelled writing versus writing with some spelling mistakes, and then seeing how much more interesting it is, that can be helpful. And this lesson plan and both of these sheets are coming to you super shortly in your freebie. And then another thing that I want to make sure is that my kids can write sentences independently. And again, with kindergarten, we're not writing sentences at the beginning of the year, but I also don't use sentence frames or sentence starters at the beginning of the year. And so it's again going with that idea of starting out with less support to try to get them to feel confident and self-reliant, and then adding more in as the year goes on. So for example, what I wouldn't do at the beginning of the year is write, I like to eat, and then the kids fill in pizza, because I want them to come up with that whole sentence of I like to eat pizza on their own. Now, sentence frames, sentence starters are super helpful, very effective with English language learners. But again, I want to teach them at the beginning of the year to write sentences, to come up with a sentence in their head, and to write it. And with kindergartners and first graders, obviously this can be a challenge. So what you can do if you're teaching kids that are having trouble with that process of brainstorming and then remembering the sentence and writing it correctly and spacing between words is this line drawing strategy. And we don't have time to go too far in depth in it, but basically you just teach the kids to say the sentence that they want to write out loud, count the number of words, using their fingers is great for that, draw one line for each word, and then they write the sentence. They're again saying the sentence out loud, but they've already drawn a line and they're writing one word on each line. That helps with developing concept of word, planning a sentence, and actually writing it out. And this process is in your freebie. I know we went over this quickly. We're kind of running out of time, and I want to make sure we get to our giveaway shortly. All right, the third way that I promote student independence during writing time is by providing visual supports. And you already saw an example of this little mini lesson chart here. This is a visual support that kids can go to when they don't know what to write about. And so you might have one for picking a topic or spelling a word. You might have different charts that you create during your mini lessons. However, we also all have limited wall space, right? And so sometimes, in addition to a couple of anchor charts, it's nice to give kids their own tools that they can keep right in front of them. And we talked about folders before, but I told you I liked to have the ones with the prongs. And what I do with those are I'll put in different tools. I have an alphabet chart. I have a blends and digraphs chart. vowels if that's relevant, maybe an editing checklist or a genre checklist, maybe even a personal spelling dictionary. If you don't have my writing folder tools yet, all of this is available free to you. These are things that I don't start by stuffing everything in their folders, but as the year goes on, I teach them how to use more tools. And if you would like access to those tools, it is a separate download in the freebie, but the freebie that you're going to be getting has a link to this. So you can get all of this stuff for free as well if you don't already have it. All right, strategy number 4 to get kids writing more independently. In addition to everything we've talked about visual supports, getting them to spell words, make sentences independently. Another thing that really helps is to motivate them with writing celebrations. And what I found is that when my kids are looking forward to, hey, we're going to be sharing our books with each other, or maybe parents are coming in, or another class, maybe like 6-7 times a year, they tend to work more independently because they know that they're going to have a piece of writing ready. And so at the start of any unit, I'm usually telling my kids like, hey, at the end of this unit, we're going to have this celebration and you're going to share your writing with, in this way with this group of people. And so then throughout the unit, I talk about the celebration. Hey, we're getting ready for this. Remember, we're getting ready for this. And it's not necessarily that they're only writing one piece, because they're not. They're writing lots of pieces, and then they're like maybe choosing the best one to celebrate in that celebration. But just keeping that focus on like, why are we doing this? What is our purpose here? It sends the message that the kids have to be ready. And so it's motivating them to stay on task, to do what they're supposed to be doing. And it also provides a real deadline because, on February 25th, the kindergarten class is coming to our room and you have to be ready with your piece. It has to be done then to share with them. In your freebie, I have a list of suggestions for writing celebrations and also possible audiences that your kids can share their writing with. All right, last but not least for writing, whatever strategies you're using to get your kids to write more independently, whether it's some of the stuff I've shared, your own strategies, my recommendation above all is just to stay consistent. So if you expect, for example, your kids to independently start a new story when they finish what they're working on, and you've already taught that expectation, and a child comes up to you and says, I'm finished, don't tell her what to do, right? You want to ask her what she should do. You want to ask her how she's going to figure it out. And it does take time for little ones, but to learn all this stuff. But the more consistent we stay with our expectations, the more independent they become. All right, so those were our 5 strategies for promoting independence during writing time. And I'm going to skip questions because we have just one last little section before our giveaway. Now, I know this was a ton of information, and I do promise I have resources for you that can support you with this as we go forward here. But I want to talk a little bit, just for a couple of minutes, about how we can integrate reading and writing workshop together in our classroom to build that workshop classroom that I titled this webinar as. So one important thing to know is just that reading and writing are reciprocal processes. So when kids are growing in one area, this growth helps them grow in another. So saying like, I don't have time for writing, well, you're actually crippling your kids' reading learning too, because what they learn in writing, that helps them become better readers. And what they're doing in their reading helps them become better writers. So it all ties together. Okay, so here are just some examples of how your reading and writing workshop can really work in conjunction. So one thing that I like to do is have them working, whoops, I'm just trying to highlight that first one there, have them working on the same genre in reading workshop and writing workshop. So for example, if we are reading nonfiction and we're working on nonfiction strategies in reading workshop, then in writing workshop, we're writing nonfiction books. Now with like opinion writing, there's not a ton of opinion books out there, so it doesn't necessarily match up there. But what I did with my reading and writing bundles, they're paced so that if you start the reading and writing components at about the same time in the year, you're more or less working on the same genre, because kids naturally, and with your help, they're going to make connections between the books that they're reading and the books that they're writing. If they see like a really good text feature in a nonfiction book, it's got labels and stuff, you can help them take what they've learned from that text feature and apply it to their writing, to draw their own text feature. Like, it's so cool to see them making connections and using what they're learning. Another nice thing, just practically speaking, when you're matching up genres with like your reading workshop and your writing workshop, if you read something to them in reading workshop, that can also be a mentor text for writing workshop. So like I was talking about, I don't bring a book into writing workshop, read the whole thing, and then talk about, oh, what is this writer doing? I like to read it beforehand. And so if you've already read nonfiction, you can use that same book and use it as a writing mentor text, which is a huge time saver. Another nice thing is that when you're, coordinating your reading and writing workshop, they can apply like the same or similar concepts, which saves you instructional time. So let's say that you've talked about characters, problems, solution, or setting too. Maybe you've got like a graphic organizer that you've been using in reading workshop to like map out all these parts of a story. We'll have them use that same graphic organizer to plan their writing. Obviously it's going to take some explanation so that they get how they're using them differently, but then you need fewer graphic organizers for them to learn. Another nice thing, if you're doing nonfiction, they can be learning vocabulary in reading workshop and using it in their writing. So again, that's a way that they can make their writing better. And then research projects also work well if you're doing reading and writing workshop. Like, your kids can read about a topic using the reading strategies you're teaching, and then they can write about it. That's really helpful if you have kids that feel like they don't have a lot of knowledge to write in nonfiction writing. Well, if they're reading about stuff in reading workshop, they can use that information in their writing. All right, so last but not least, I want to touch on scheduling. We obviously don't have a ton of time to go into this, but as I said before, in the freebie, you're going to have sample schedules that you can look at for kinder, first, and second grade. And scheduling the whole day, that could be like an entire webinar in itself, but I know that a lot of us are crunched for time, so look at those samples, and if you're having trouble with scheduling, these are just a few tips if you're short on time. So one thing to do is to keep your reading workshop brief if necessary. I was talking about how you can do reading workshop in 20 minutes, 25 minutes, or if you're already doing Centers in Daily 5, you can just have your independent reading time be during that. If that's what works, like if that's what works in your schedule, like go for that. Another option you can do if you're feeling short on time is, for writing workshop, maybe you don't have time for a mini lesson every day, but you're like, I really want my kids writing every day. Have a work time only Wednesdays where your writing block is shorter because you just don't have the time. And instead of a mini lesson, you're just like, hey, you've been working on this, keep working. Because your kids are already into their pieces that they're writing, unless you're at the very beginning of a unit. And so they can take what they've been learning and just apply it. And so that's a way to shorten your writing block a little bit. I recommend having a mini lesson every day if you can, but I've also been in a situation where I was so crunched for teaching time, and so I had to do, one day where we didn't have a mini lesson. And then last but not least, I do want to reassure you, if you have a big scheduling issue, is that something is better than nothing. And while I do recommend implementing both reading and writing workshop every day, if you just can't make it happen due to scheduling constraints that are out of your control, doing workshop 3 to 4 days a week can still make an impact. I understand all schedules are different, but it doesn't have to be like an all or nothing thing. You can still make this work. Oops, not wanting to click. All right, so thank you for bearing with me. We are at almost 2 hours, and now I want to share with you what the giveaway prize is for today. And it's really now about applying all of this, because this is a lot of information, right? Especially if you haven't, seen my previous reading and writing workshop webinars that I've done. I know it's a lot. I also know that it's one thing to be like, yeah, like I got this, and you're listening to a presentation, and then when you actually go to the point where you're like trying to implement it, it seems overwhelming. I totally understand that. I've been there. I've been where I was listening to a workshop and I'm like, I'm going to do all this, and then I just either don't have time or I just get overwhelmed and only implement a few parts. So this is why I designed my workshop bundles. I always want to have some sort of continuing support for you, because we had 2 hours today, which is a lot of time, but in like the big scheme of things, it's really not a lot of time, because you have a whole school year ahead of you. So my workshop bundles can provide you with continued support in implementing all of this stuff, and they will also save tons of lesson planning time for you. And that's what our giveaway prize is today. My mouse is not cooperating very well. Okay, so we've got the reading component and the writing component in each one of these things. And with the reading component or the writing component, this is true where you get complete lesson plans. They're so detailed that you can just hand them to a sub, but they also still fit on one page. And at the same time, even though everything's really written out for you, you can easily adapt or adjust the lessons to meet your kids' needs. They're designed to be flexible like that. In addition to the lesson plans, in both the reading and writing component, there's visuals, because you can teach all you want, right? Like, you want the kids to apply those strategies, and sometimes they just need a visual reminder of what they're supposed to be doing. And so whether it's the writing component or the reading component, I have those visuals in there to help you with that. With all of this, if you haven't used the workshop model before, or even if you have, assessment can be really tricky because the kids are like reading and writing independently, they're choosing stuff. Well, how do you assess them? Rubrics and checklists are super helpful. We didn't have time to go into those today, but I want to let you know that these are in your bundles for you, both the reading component and the writing component, and this can guide you in assessing your students in both the reading and writing workshop models. A couple of things that I want you to know about the reading component. You are going to need books to teach the mini lessons. So I usually give two options, like you can use this one or use this one, and then I also describe what kind of book you'll need. So like if you're not going to use those, like use a nonfiction book that's about an animal. So it's very flexible. I know that you may not have unlimited access to all the books in the world, unlimited funds, of course. And so I wanted them to be flexible so that you can choose and use the books that you already have instead of needing to go and buy a ton of new ones. Now, obviously, if you use one of the options that I described, it's that much easier, but you have choice, you have flexibility. In the reading component, students do not need to have their own copies of each book. At the beginning of kindergarten, I like to use big books. You can use big books in first grade as well, but a document camera like I talked about earlier works just fine. And then also in the reading component, you have some like reading response prompts and little follow-up activities. Those are also included just to kind of complement what you're doing in the mini lessons. And then last but not least, things to know about the writing component. I do have narrative, informational, and fiction genres that kind of spiral throughout the year, because what the research shows is that it's better to give kids like multiple opportunities to grasp something rather than just teaching it for a long time at once and then moving on permanently. So it gives them multiple opportunities throughout the year. There's those checklists and rubrics for you as the teacher, but they're also in there for student self-assessment. So kids can look at their own writing, and we're trying to teach them to be self-reflective and really think about their writing and how they might improve it. And then last but not least, grammar and conventions are also integrated into the lessons. And the first and second grade versions of the writing component have these optional mini, just like grammar exercises. They're not really drills. They're more like exercises to practice, because grammar is also something that's well integrated into writing. And then if you start using the reading and writing materials at about the same time, you'll be able to match up with the genres like we were talking about. So it makes life simple, much simpler. All right, let's go ahead and do our giveaway. Let me go ahead and grab the list of people who were here. I will put up that link. Remember, if you're a winner and you have part of this or all of it already, not to worry. You can pick something else in my TPT store that you like. I just want to make sure that if you are a winner, you have access to this, because this will really help you implement everything that we've talked about today, because I know it's a lot, and a lot of us have like a whole year ahead of us. And so I want to make sure that you have some ongoing support that lasts beyond our 2 hours. I'm losing my voice. Okay, so if you hear your name called, I'm going to ask you to type "I'm here" in the chat box. Now, if you can't chat for whatever reason, not to worry. Again, I do have that list of everybody who is here live. But all of my winners are going to need to email me your grade level choice. So if you don't have one of these bundles, let me know if you want Kinder First or Second. And if you happen to have one of these already, let me know what you'd like instead. Just take a peek in my TPT store and decide what you would like. So my first winner is Emily. Emily is Emily, SAVARESE at Gmail. Emily, let us know if you're here. And then Emily's also going to need to email me and let me know what you would like. All right, next winner is Abena. It says Sunview Abena at Outlook. Abena, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Apologies if I'm not, but let me know if you're here. Molly, MZSCHAU at VUSD.org. Molly, let us know if you're here. Yvette, ABIETTE at Hotmail. Yvette, let us know if you're here. I recognize your email address. Meredith, MD Malloy at ferrisisd.org. Meredith, let us know if you're here. And then Savannah, 6453. Malika, 64 at rogers.com. Savannah, let us know if you are here. All right, so congratulations to my winners. Winners, make sure to email me and let me know what grade level you would like. And then for everybody else, if you were not a winner, I do still have a big sale for you. So I put all of these bundles at 25% off through Friday. I shared the link with you and I'll also be emailing it to you. So that's like a good chunk because this combines the writing and reading components. And if you only need one of them, those, you only need one unit or you only need writing or you only need reading, those are also on sale. Those are discounted by 20%, but you get the biggest discount if you get them together. You get like a quadruple discount with all the bundling and the extra discount through Friday. Friday at midnight Eastern time, this coming Friday, the sale will turn off automatically. So just know that these are 25% off through then. This is as big as a discount as you ever get in my TPT store, even when TPT does the sale. So I wanted to give you that opportunity to grab them. And all right, we went to 6 minutes over, so we were at 2 hours and 6 minutes. Thank you for sticking around. I hope that this was helpful. I know it was a lot of information. I hope that if you have a bundle, it helps you really implement all of this. I'm going to go ahead and share the freebie. Should the freebie not download for you for whatever reason, do not worry. Within a couple of hours, you should get an email. I forget what time I set it up for, but you should get an email with the freebie links, with the bundle links. As long as this recorded, knock on wood, you should get that. You should get a certificate as well. So give it until the end of today. Check your promotions tab, check your spam tab if you didn't get it. And to make sure that it gets through to you, you can also, I'll just put this as a little sticky up here. You can also add my email address as a contact, because sometimes these emails get lost, which is frustrating because I know you want your freebie and your certificate and all that. So right up there at the top, I put my email address. And if you go into your email and you add me as a contact, my little email address there, that will help make sure that it gets delivered to you, because email delivery is sometimes great and sometimes not. And I want you to get that certificate. You were here for 2 hours, like you deserve that, and your freebie and all that good stuff. So you can add my address to your email. And then I would love to answer your questions. So if you're able to stick around longer, please retype your questions because I have missed a bunch and they all got pushed down. If you have to leave us, I totally understand. We've been over 2 hours. It's been a long one, so thanks for being here. But otherwise, please retype your questions so that I can answer them now. Okay. Evelyn says the link was taking me to the flexible shared reading bundles instead of the reading or the combined bundles. Let me check. Oh yeah, that's not the right link. Just kidding. Sorry guys. Okay. That link that I was showing you was not the right one. Many apologies. Let me grab the correct link. So that was not even to my TPT store. What you should have is this. Okay. So it might look a little bit funny now, but that link that I just put up there, it says reading and writing workshop bundles, 25% off through Friday. That should be the correct one now. Sorry that I gave you the wrong one earlier. Amy, will you email a link to the winners? So the winners need to email me so that I know which grade level to send you, and then I'll be in touch with them. Denise, I'm glad it was helpful. Sarah says, if I'm a member of Learning at the Primary Pond, so Sarah, the only way to get this bundle would be to get it either through my TPT store if you didn't have it before. No, still the wrong one? Uh-oh. Yes, it is still the wrong one. Why is that? Okay, let me make a new offer. You're right. Okay. Bundle discount. Okay. Okay. Hopefully now this is the right one. I don't know why it wouldn't let me save that. That's so weird. Okay, so hopefully now you should see another button. Sorry, this is like the fourth time, but it says reading and writing bundle dis. It should say reading and writing bundle discount. I think it got cut off, but that is the correct link finally. Okay, Caitlin says, if you had the choice, would you rather reading and writing in the morning block or middle block? Wondering whether to have math in the morning or language block. So Caitlin, I think it's personal preference. I like to have the reading time in the morning just because the kids seem a little bit calmer. Writing time, I feel like it could go either way, but in the afternoon, it's kind of like a more active thing, right? So that could go well in the afternoon. So maybe that would help you get math in the morning. Kim says, can the bundle be used alongside with the language arts curriculum that we use? So Kim, it definitely depends on what your curriculum is. Let me go back to these because this is what we're talking about. These are mini lessons and they're a curriculum that can last you all year long. I know that some teachers completely replace what they're doing with this, and this stuff can stand alone. But I also know that some teachers take what they're doing and they, pick like, oh, we're working on, visualizing. I'm going to use this lesson. So I know that they can be integrated into what you're already doing. It just depends on like, if you have a reading series that you have to follow in lockstep and you can't deviate, then like probably a bundle wouldn't be a good idea. But if you have some flexibility, then I know that a lot of teachers integrate these with what they're already doing. Tanya, where can I find which spelling strategies to teach? So Tanya, there's actually a list. There should be a list in your freebie. I want to make sure that the freebie was actually correct as well. So let me just put that up one more time and double check. Yes. Okay. So the freebie is fine. I don't know why the other link wasn't working. Is that even? Okay. Okay. Thank you, Sharon. So Sharon is an example of somebody who uses Lucy Calkins stuff, and she says, your ideas and mini lessons are far easier to follow, thank you, Sharon, than Lucy Calkins, and she uses both. So that's an example of somebody who's able to integrate both. Morgan, the list of mentor texts should be in that freebie, or there should be a link. I also have a list on my blog at learningattheprimarypond.com. Okay. Erin says, how would you implement these workshops with kindergarten students who are legally blind? Do you have any suggestions for differentiation? So Erin, I, like full disclosure, have not worked with students who are legally blind. I don't know if you're like a self-contained classroom, and I honestly don't know. I don't know what it would be like with, students that can't see the text that you're pointing to. So that might get a little bit tricky with the shared reading lessons, at least the ones that I use. So I don't really know. That's not something that I have experience with, unfortunately. Mona says, how different is your small group writing lessons from the writing workshop bundle? So Mona's asking about a completely different resource that's not pictured here. I do have small group writing lessons that are really targeted, like if your kids are struggling with adding details, or if your kids are struggling with using punctuation marks, teach this lesson. And so, Mona, they're different in that this writing component is a curriculum that stands alone. It is, walking the kids through how to write a complete piece from start to finish, whereas the small group writing lessons are more like one-off things that you can use to supplement when kids aren't getting certain skills. So hopefully that makes sense. Cheryl says, is there a difference between reading workshop and guided reading? Cheryl, yeah. So guided reading refers to a specific type of small group instruction. And if you're interested in seeing, I have a recording of a workshop you can watch on guided reading. Please feel free to email me and I'll send that to you. You could, in theory, Cheryl, you could have this reading workshop format where you have the mini lesson and independent reading time, and you could pull your small groups during that reading time if you wanted to integrate the two. Sally, yes, the winners were announced, and I don't believe I pulled a Sally. Renee says, when you taught kindergarten, how did you incorporate letter ID and letter sounds into the workshop approach, letter a week or something else? So Renee, I typically would teach multiple letters a week. And then I would teach multiple letters each week, whole group. And actually, Renee, I'm going to be doing a kindergarten workshop next month. So for anybody who is interested in, or who is teaching kindergarten and wants to talk more about how to make this stuff and letter instruction work in kindergarten, I do have a workshop that I'm planning for next month, and it's going to be kindergarten specific. And I'm really looking forward to that one. But Renee, I'm going to go more in depth on that then. And I do have kind of like an introduction where everybody, we are all working on the letters, letter formations, letter sounds, and then I eventually differentiate in small groups. But let me get the link. If you fill out this survey or whatever and put your email address in here, then I will send you an invitation to that kindergarten specific workshop. And that again is happening in August. And I'll put the link to get on the wait list for that up here. I'll put it in the chat too, but we can talk more about kindergarten then too. Anna says, my reading block time is limited. How can I integrate the reading workshop into my guided reading or centers? So Anna, if you're really crunched for time, you could do, and I actually mentioned this a second ago, you could have your reading mini lesson, and then you could have all sorts of centers and independent, one of your centers would be independent reading or one of your choices, and then you would be pulling your guided reading during that time if that's something you need to condense. Jennifer says, I know I'm down on questions, I'm just working my way back up. Jennifer says, for sharing partners, do you assign them? Okay, so sometimes I let them choose, but I would say, trying to think, I've done it different ways. Sometimes they have an assigned partner for, when they're partner reading, I do often assign them a partner specifically, but for sharing time, I would say a lot of the time it's just whoever they're sitting next to. But with some classes, I do structure it more. So I know that's kind of like a both, but I just kind of feel it out. And if I do assign partners, they're usually in their partnerships for a month to 6 weeks. Brooke says, do you do the same lesson for each group during reading workshop for the week and then move on? Or how do you decide which lessons to do for which group? Brooke, so I'm not 100% I'm sure I'm understanding you, and it might just be because I'm tired, but are you talking about small groups? Because this is more, you can do this in small groups, but this is more designed to be whole group. With small groups, I tend to do mostly guided reading, which is a whole separate thing. But if you were going to use this for small group, I'm just trying to make sure I am understanding your question the best that I can. I wouldn't necessarily be teaching this same lesson to the same small group over and over again, because that would be redundant, whereas I could just do it whole group, if that makes sense. Teresa says, for kinder students, do you have them draw or write first? Draw for sure, and then I start teaching them how to label. Thank you, Nikki. I appreciate that. Studying to become a teacher. Awesome. Marceline says, first you said that when a child does not know how to write a word, you try to elicit it from him or her using different strategies. What if it is a sight word which you do not cover during that year and is also not on your word wall? Would you tell him how to write it? What are your suggestions? Thanks. So at the beginning of the year, I really don't tell them how to write it, and I just tell them to use, the strategies that I'm teaching them. As the year goes on, if it's something that's, like the word could, and we're in kindergarten, like, and they maybe are not learning that as a sight word yet, I can tell them how to write it, but I can write it on a sticky note for them. And if you have them keeping like personal word dictionaries, I can also just write it in their personal word dictionary for them, and then they can refer back to it in the future. Yes, Sherry, the freebie will definitely be sent out in a follow-up email. Moira, I don't have intervention bundles for primary levels. I do hope to have something in the future because it's a lot of what I do as a reading specialist, but my guided reading bundles are a great resource for at least like the read, not so much like phonics, although there are phonics resources in there. My guided reading bundles in terms of like getting them reading, I use those with my intervention students. Okay, you're welcome, Tracy. Thank you for coming. Anne says, I have both of your reading and writing bundles. Should I add the shared reading one, or would that be a duplicate? And which ones do you have? Is it the second grade that you have? Because if you feel good with your reading instruction, your reading instruction, then you probably wouldn't need this, but it kind of depends. Let me know which one you have. Okay, Robin, great question. This applies to probably a lot of people. I have purchased a couple of your writing units individually from TPT. If I purchase a bundle this week, is there a way to get a refund on the individual units I've already bought? Yes, for sure. I would never want you to pay for something twice. So if you bought something on TPT that's like a component of this and you want the big bundle, what TPT support will have you do is go ahead and buy the big bundle and then email them, or you can use their contact form on the website. There's like at the bottom. Use the contact form, let them know like, hey, I have this and I already purchased this, and they will refund you those individual units, or even, like a bundle that you may have purchased. Donna, I haven't actually used Fountas and Pinnell. I'm familiar with their work and I've learned a lot from them, but I haven't used their specific literacy program. Carlene, yes. Carlene, email me your questions so we can figure out how to do that. Let me know what you want and let me know what you already have. Thanks, Kendra. I'm glad it was helpful. Christina says, where is the link in the freebie for the writing folder supports? Let me make sure that I told you the right thing. Okay. Okay, so it's possible. I don't see it. So thank you for saying something. I'm gonna go back and check, and then if you don't see the writing folder tools freebie in there, the way you download the freebie now, that same link will work. You don't need to email me or anything like that, but if it's not in there after we're done here, I'll go check and I will add it for you. So you can use that same link and just re-download it, and I'll have the freebie, the extra freebie. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. Nikki says, during writing workshop, do you have flexible seating? Do the students work at their desks or seats, or do they choose where they work? So writing workshop typically works best when they have like a flat surface to work on. I haven't had a lot of like flexible seating options in the past in our classroom, but sometimes as a treat, I'll let them like choose where they want to write. With reading, they do get to choose where they read. Tanya is looking for spelling strategies. Hopefully I did not miss that. Just gonna scroll. There is a lot in the freebie, I know. So make sure when you look at the first page, that will kind of tell you where everything is. I will also make sure that that is in there. Thank you for letting me know. Angie, yes. So if you're in the KLC, definitely, yeah, come to the webinar next month, and you'll get the invitation. Thank you, Lawanda. I appreciate that. Jennifer says, what words go into the spelling dictionaries in their writing folder? So that's really up to you. If you want to have them put high frequency words that they're learning in there, go for that. If you want to use it as a resource where if a child loves dinosaurs and you want to, write down dinosaur names for them because that's something they write about a lot, put it in there. It's really kind of like whatever your kids are going to find most useful because it's really a tool for them. Linda says, do these reading workshops link up to the guided reading? Do they teach the same strategies? So yeah, like overall, Linda, Linda's talking about my separate guided reading resource. It's not necessarily that it's like teach this mini lesson with this group, but you can absolutely use the guided reading materials to support what you're doing there. And it, also depends on what level your kids are at. Oh, Chris, that's awesome. I haven't used Class Dojo since like a while ago, but he said, if you use Class Dojo, you can have random sharing partners every day, unless there's a specific reason I want certain students together. I use this. They know it's random, less complaining, and they also know it's just for the day, and tomorrow they'll have a different sharing partner. Oh, and on Dojo, you can also set it if you don't want certain students together. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Thanks, Diana. I appreciate that. Thank you, Connie. Everybody is going to get the freebie link, and I'm going to double check and make sure that I have, let me write a note to myself. We want to make sure that we have the writing folder tools and the spelling strategies list. I'll make sure all that's in there. It's going to be the same link, and in a second here, I'll go and check out the email that I was going to send out. Kirsten, yeah, you can absolutely use whatever books that the kids are reading in their reading bags for sure. Yes, Sharon, the freebies, everything will be fixed when you get the email. Hopefully the email did not go out yet and I can grab it in time. But yes. Denise said, I am so overwhelmed with all of this. There will be week by week support by you so we can unpack things as needed. So Denise, if you're using this really tells you, it really lays out for you like day 1, do this, day 2, do that, day 3, do that. So the support is included in there. Yvonne, the certificate is getting emailed to you shortly, and I should probably go check on that now. So I will let you go. Thanks, Angie. I appreciate that. If I did miss your question, not intentional, you can feel free to email me if I did miss something. I'm going to go ahead right now and make sure that the email that you're getting has all kinds of stuff in there. I'm going to make sure that it has the correct freebie with all of the resources. I'll make sure that it has the correct link with the sale, no code needed, that all these bundles are on sale through Friday. The individual components are on sale as well. That email is going to have your certificate as well. And I do recommend adding me. So it's alison@learning@theprimarypond.com. If you add me as a contact, that helps make sure that my emails get to you. Check your spam, check your promotions tab. Sometimes they end up there for whatever reason. And if you don't get this stuff by like tonight, then feel free to email me by just responding to one of those reminder emails from the system. Thank you for being here. This was like the longest webinar ever, so I hope that it was helpful. And remember that you do have support. This lays everything out for you if you end up getting these bundles, if you feel like that's something that would be helpful to you. So the sale is on through Friday, and feel free to email me if you have any questions, and have a wonderful rest of your day.